The mess hall held 400 people when Corporal Logan Mercer raised his hand and brought it down across a sailor's face. The sound was flat and sharp, at the same time the kind that stops a room cold. Trays stopped moving. Conversations died. Someone's coffee cup hit the floor. The sailor didn't scream, didn't swing back. She stood up slowly, adjusted her collar, and walked out like she had somewhere better to be. Mercer laughed. His boys laughed with him. Nobody in that room knew what she was hiding beneath that collar. By the time they found out, it was already too late for all of them. If you've never seen a story like this one, hit subscribe right now, because we put out new cinematics stories every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming. Drop a like on this video and tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning shift at Harbor Ridge Naval Station started at 05:30, and by the time Maya Torres reached the mess hall, the line for hot food already stretched past the double doors and halfway down the corridor. She grabbed a metal tray, slid it along the rail, nodded at the server who ladled scrambled eggs onto her plate without making eye contact, and moved toward the coffee station. Black, no sugar. She filled the cup halfway because full cup spilled, and she had learned years ago to stop carrying more than she needed. The mess hall was loud the way institutional spaces always are, the clash of metal trays, boots on tile, overlapping voices, the industrial hum of ventilation pushing recycled air through a building that smelled like cleaning product and powdered milk. Maya had eaten in worse places. She had eaten in places where the noise outside wasn't ventilation, but something that made you low crawl to the wall before you reached for your food. This was fine. This was manageable. She found an open seat at the end of a long table near the east windows, the kind of table nobody wanted because the morning light came in sideways and made it hard to read. Maya didn't have anything to read. She sat down, set her tray, and started eating. She was 3 bites into her eggs when she noticed the sign. It was mounted on a small placard holder at the center of the table, the kind printed on cardstock and laminated, USMC Personnel 500-700. Black letters, Marine Corps emblem in the corner. She looked at the placard. She looked at the clock on the wall above the serving line. 06:12. She looked back at her eggs. It was 12 minutes past the Marine window. The table had been cleared. There wasn't a single Marine sitting at it, or within 20 feet of it. The rest of the mess hall was packed sailors, a few Army liaison personnel, 2 officers from the air station, who sat together near the far wall with the body language of people who considered themselves separate from all of this. Every other table was occupied. Maya picked up her fork again. Hey. She didn't look up. Hey, sailor. She took another bite. The voice came closer, boots hitting the tile, in that deliberate rhythm that meant someone wanted to be heard approaching. Maya kept her eyes on her tray. She registered the sound, registered the trajectory, registered the 3 sets of footsteps behind the primary one. 4 total. She noted that without doing anything about it. The way you note weather. You deaf? Or just stupid? She looked up, then. He was a corporal. The chevrons were on his collar, and his name tape read Mercer in black block letters. Tall, built wide through the shoulders, with the kind of face that expected agreement. Mid-20s, maybe. The jaw was set in the way that people set their jaws when they've decided something from before they've opened their mouths. Behind him stood 3 other Marines. One was genuinely amused. One looked uncomfortable and was doing a bad job of hiding it. The third had the blank expression of someone who had learned to be wherever Mercer was and show nothing about it. Tables marked, Mercer said. He pointed at the placard like she hadn't seen it. Window ended 12 minutes ago, Maya said. He blinked. He hadn't expected her to talk back. She could see the recalibration happening in real time. Window ends. When we say it ends. That's not how the sign works. One of the Marines behind him, the uncomfortable one, shifted his weight. The amused one's smile went a degree wider. Mercer pulled out the chair across from her and sat down in it, forearms on the table, leaning forward into her space. He was performing something. She understood that. She also understood that the performance required an audience, and there were people at adjacent tables who had stopped pretending not to listen. "You know what I think?" he said. She didn't answer. "I think you're one of those Navy teeps who got assigned here and thinks that means something." He looked her over the deliberate, top-to-bottom assessment meant to make someone feel small. "What's your rate? Yeoman? You file papers? That it?" "Petty Officer Torres," she said, "and I'm done with breakfast." Picked up her tray. "I didn't say you could go." Stood up anyway. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Mercer's hand shot out and grabbed her forearm, not to hurt, at first, just to stop her. The kind of grip that says I'm still talking. Maya stopped. She looked down at his hand on her arm. She looked up at his face. "Sit back down," he said. The mess hall had gone very quiet. Not the sudden silence of a room reacting to violence. The creeping, spreading quiet of a room that senses something is about to happen and doesn't want to miss it. "Let go," she said. He didn't. She could have ended it there. She knew exactly what she could have done with the pressure points in his wrist, the angle of his elbow, the shift in her weight that would have put him on the floor with his arm locked before anyone processed what they'd seen. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat, involuntarily, constantly, without thinking about it. She didn't. She stood there and let him hold her arm because she understood something Mercer didn't. The moment she used what she actually knew how to do, the story became about her and not about him. And Maya Torres had spent the last 2 years being very careful about which stories got told. Mercer released her arm. Then he stood up not because he was done, but because standing gave him height, and height was the next tool in a limited arsenal. "You don't belong here," he said, loud enough, now that it wasn't really to her anymore. "You belong in a file room, somewhere pushing papers and staying out of the way of people who actually train for something." Picked up her tray. He took it from her hands. The tray hit the floor, not thrown, just dropped, let go from shoulder height, so it crashed against the tile with the kind of noise that nobody in the room could pretend not to hear. Eggs, coffee, scattered across the floor. Maya looked at the mess on the floor. She looked at him. Then she did something that confused him more than anything else could have. She crouched down and started picking up the pieces of her breakfast. "Leave it," he said. She kept picking things up. "I said leave it." His voice had a new edge now, the edge that came from not getting the reaction he wanted. He wanted her to cry, or swing at him, or storm off, or report him. Any of those would have been satisfying in different ways. Quiet, methodical cleanup was something he didn't have a script for. She stood back up with the tray, the cup, the fork were a loss. She set the tray back on the serving rail. "I'm going to file the report," she said, to nobody in particular. Just a statement of fact, delivered in the same tone she might have used to say it's going to rain. "Go ahead," Mercer said. "Nothing's going to happen." She walked out. He was right that nothing was going to happen. He was wrong about why. The report went into the system at 07:15 and landed on Commander Rebecca Sloan's desk by 0800. Sloan read it twice. She was 41 years old, with a face that showed most of those years unconsciously. And she had been the executive officer of Harbor Ridge's Joint Training Division long enough to recognize the bureaucratic weight of an incident report that named a Marine corporal and a Navy petty officer in the same sentence. That was always paperwork. That was always a conversation with someone she didn't want to have a conversation with. But it was the name on the report that made her pause. Exception, Petty Officer Maya Torres. Sloan set the folder down on her desk. She turned to her computer terminal and opened the personnel database. In the name, she waited. The file that came back was flagged with 3 security tags, the kind that meant the full record required a different clearance level to access, and the summary you got without it was a deliberately incomplete picture. Name, rank, rate, current assignment, service dates. Decorations listed by code, not by name, because some decorations came with context that wasn't available to general review. Sloane stared at the decoration codes for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. "I need to speak to the personnel officer at Naval Special Warfare Command," she said when the line connected. "This is Commander Sloane at Harbor Ridge. Tell them it's about one of their people." She was on hold for 4 minutes. The person who came on the line did not give their name. "Commander Sloane," the voice said. "What can I do for you?" "I have a Petty Officer Torres assigned to my station. She filed an incident report this morning." Sloane paused. I pulled her file and hit a wall. "I need to understand what I'm dealing with." A brief silence on the other end. "What kind of wall?" "The kind with 3 flags and a list of decorations I can't read the citations for." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'd suggest, Commander, that you treat Petty Officer Torres with the same care you'd extend any other service member on your installation." "That's not what I asked. It's what I'm authorized to tell you." The line went quiet. Sloane set the phone down slowly. She sat back in her chair. Outside her office window, she could see the far edge of the training grounds, the obstacle course, the vehicle lane, the concrete range house that nobody used anymore because the new indoor facility had replaced it. She could see, if she looked hard enough, the shape of a small figure in Navy-issue PT gear, crossing toward the training facility building at a pace that was not a run, but was also not a walk. Sloane watched until the figure disappeared through the door. She pulled Torres's file back up on the screen. She started reading what she could actually access. The training facility at 0830 was empty in the way that served Maya's purposes. The morning PT formations were finished, the afternoon sessions hadn't started, and the 2 duty staff assigned to the building were in the equipment room doing inventory, which meant their attention was elsewhere. She changed out of her uniform in the women's locker room, pulling on a plain gray shirt and black short that had no markings. She tied her hair back. She took the silver chain from around her neck, a thin chain with a small metal emblem attached. The kind of thing you could mistake for a religious medal if you didn't look closely, and she folded it into her locker. With the care of someone handling something that mattered. The heavy bag on the far end of the training floor was an old one, the canvas worn soft at the impact zones, stitched and restitched in several places. She liked it for that reason. New bags had too much give. This one had developed a density from years of use that made it honest. You hit it with bad technique, and your wrist told you immediately. She wrapped her hands from a roll of tape she kept in her bag. Took 2 minutes doing it correctly, bridge to palm, between each finger, over the knuckles. She had learned to wrap her hands from a man named Petty Officer First Class Darren Okafor, who had died 14 months ago in a country she couldn't name in conversation, during a mission that had a different name in the official record than it had when people who were there talked about it, which they didn't. She started slow. Jab-cross combinations, shoulder rotation, keeping the elbow in, letting the bag swing, and meeting it on the return. She worked her way into it the same way she'd been trained to enter a structure, methodical, no wasted movement, each action building toward the next. Not fitness, not stress relief, something closer to maintenance, keeping the mechanisms functional, keeping the calibration tight. By the time she was 20 minutes in, and the sweat had soaked through her shirt, she was working she couldn't teach anyone at Harbor Ridge, because explaining them would require explaining context she hadn't given anyone here. The inside-outside entry drill. The close quarters break from a clinch. The knee-to-elbow transition that Okafor had drilled into her at a forward operating base in the dark for 3 consecutive nights until she could execute it at speed without thinking about thinking. She didn't think about what Mercer had done in the mess hall. She didn't think about the report she'd filed, or what would come of it. She thought about technique. She thought about Okafor's voice in her ear saying elbows in. Torres You're leaving your jaw open. Again. She hit the bag. She thought about the 12 members of her team who had deployed with her and the 8 who had come back. She hit it harder. Commander Sloan found her 40 minutes later, still working. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching before she spoke. Long enough to see the caliber of what she was watching, which was something different from what she'd expected from the photograph in the personnel file. Petty Officer Torres. Maya stopped. She didn't react the way people reacted when they were startled, the hard flinch, the pivot. She turned smoothly, breathing elevated but controlled, and faced Sloan with the expression of someone who had been aware of the door opening before Sloan had spoken. Commander. Sloan walked in, hands behind her back. She stopped at a reasonable conversational distance and looked at the bag, then at Torres. You filed a report this morning. Yes, ma'am. Against Corporal Mercer. Yes, ma'am. Walk me through it. Maya did. Flat, sequential, no editorializing. Sloan listened without interrupting. He put his hands on you, Sloan said when she finished. He grabbed my forearm. Yes. And you didn't respond. Brief pause. I walked away. Sloan studied her. Why? Maya looked at her steadily. Because I wasn't interested in making it worse. Sloan made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite skepticism. She walked to the window that looked out over the main training area and stood there for a moment. Harbor Ridge is running a joint evaluation next week, she said. 3 days. Multi-branch. Physical, tactical, medical response. It's not mandatory for shore-based personnel, but I have discretion to assign participation. Maya was quiet. I'd like to assign you. Ma'am, with respect, I came to Harbor Ridge for a low-profile posting. I know what you came for. Sloan turned from the window. I also know that low profile has limits. Someone put their hand on you in a mess hall in front of 400 witnesses and then watched you clean up the floor. She kept her voice even. That kind of thing spreads. Once it does, it defines you here, and everything after it gets filtered through that moment. Maya looked at the bag. She looked at her wrapped hands. Who else is assigned to the evaluation? Various personnel from the Marine contingent. A deliberate pause. Including Corporal Mercer's unit. The silence stretched. You want me to go through a 3-day evaluation with the man who assaulted me this morning, Maya said. I want to give you an environment where the record can correct itself, Sloan said. What happens in that environment is up to you. Maya began unwrapping her hands. Slow, methodical, rolling the tape back around the roll. What happens if I say no? Then you file the report. It goes into the system. Mercer gets a note in his jacket, and in 6 months, nobody remembers why. Sloan watched her. And every time you walk into that mess hall, somebody remembers the morning you cleaned eggs off the floor. It was a hard thing to say. Sloan said it anyway, because soft framing wasn't going to help anyone, and Torres struck her as someone who could read the architecture of a situation and without needing it explained. Maya set the tape roll in her bag. She looked up. When does it start? The joint evaluation briefing was held in the station's main conference room at 1300 with 14 personnel seated around, 2 pushed-together tables, and a projector screen showing the 3-day schedule in the kind of dense, formatted layout that military briefing documents always used, regardless of how complex or simple the actual content was. Master Sergeant Dale Vance ran the briefing. He was a career Marine, mid-40s, with the lean build of someone who had maintained physical standards past the point where most people quietly stopped. He went through the evaluation structure. Methodically, Day 1, physical assessment and obstacle course. Day 2, land navigation and tactical problem solving. Day 3, joint medical response scenario, and a final combined arms simulation. Maya sat at the far end of the table near the door. Mercer sat at the opposite end. He noticed her when she walked in. She saw him notice the small straightening of posture, the quick check of his unit members on either side. He hadn't expected her to be in the room. The surprise was brief, and he covered it. But not before the Marine sitting next to him, the uncomfortable one from the mess hall, whose name tape read Kowalski, caught the reaction and looked between Mercer and Maya with the expression of someone rapidly recalculating something. Vance finished the briefing and opened the floor for questions. Master Sergeant. Mercer's voice from the far end of the table. Corporal, what's the Navy personnel doing in this evaluation? I thought it was Marine-focused. Joint, Corporal. That means multiple branches. It's in the name. Beat. What's her MOS? Vance looked at Mercer, looked at his roster sheet. Petty Officer Torres is a gunner's mate. Gunner's mate. Mercer said it like it was a punchline. He looked at the Marine to his, left the amused one, whose name tape read Brash. 3 days with the gunner's mate. Brash grinned. Something funny, Corporal, Vance said. No, Master Sergeant. Good. Vance closed his folder. Be at the course at 0530 day 1. Don't be late and don't be stupid. That's all. Chairs scraped back. People moved toward the door. Maya stood, picked up her notepad, and walked past Mercer's end of the table. She didn't look at him. She was looking at the exit, moving at a pace that had a destination in it. Hey, she kept walking. Torres. She stopped at the door. Turned halfway. Mercer was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. He had the look of a man who had decided, in the space of a 2-minute briefing, that this was going to be easy. Don't slow us down out there, he said. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Not hostile, not afraid. The look of someone measuring a distance. Then she walked out. Kowalski watched her go. He turned back to Mercer. You sure about that? He said quietly. About what? She didn't flinch. Kowalski kept his voice low. In the mess hall. You hit her tray, you grabbed her. She didn't flinch once. Mercer uncrossed his arms. So most people flinch. Mercer stood up and pushed his chair in. She's a gunner's mate, Kowalski. She maintains weapons systems on ships. That's her whole career. He picked up his cover. She'll be fine with a rifle range. 3 days of real evaluation is going to be a problem for her. Kowalski said nothing. He watched the empty doorway where Torres had been. Kept whatever he was thinking to himself. Maya ate dinner alone in the satellite dining facility. On the east side of the station, smaller, less crowded, the one used primarily by shore-based support personnel. She chose it because the Marine contingent used the main facility, and she was not interested in a second incident before the evaluation started. She ate, she thought. She had not wanted the evaluation. She had wanted the report to move through the system, the way reports moved slowly, bureaucratically, resolving itself in the background while she maintained her pattern, work, train, sleep, work. She had been at Harbor Ridge for 4 months. In 4 months, she had made 2 acquaintances, both civilian contractors, both people she talked to about nothing meaningful. She had been doing exactly what she had come here to do. She thought about what Sloan had said, every time you walk into that mess hall, somebody remembers the morning you cleaned eggs off the floor. She pushed the rest of her food around her tray. The thing about being underestimated was that it worked until it didn't. For 2 years, it had worked exactly the way she needed it to. She moved through assignments, through stations, through groups of people who looked at her and saw something small and manageable and unremarkable. She had constructed that image carefully and maintained it with the same discipline she gave to everything else. Mercer had not broken that image. Mercer had confirmed it for everyone who watched, which was the problem. Because if the image held, if she was still the sailor who cleaned eggs off the floor and walked away from a corporal who put his hands on her, then Harbor Ridge became a station where that had happened, and she became the person it had happened to, and everything Sloan said about filtration and memory was exactly right. She set down her fork. She thought about the evaluation. 3 days, physical, tactical, medical. She ran the structure in her head and thought about what each phase would actually look like, the obstacle course metrics, the land nav parameters, the scenario designed for a medical response exercise. She had spent the better part of 6 years doing things significantly more demanding than any joint evaluation, run at a training station. She knew how to read a course before she ran it. She knew how to pace a 3-day effort so that what she had on day 3 was different from what most people had on day 1. She wasn't afraid of the evaluation. She was afraid of what came after. Because once you showed people what you were, you couldn't go back to being something smaller. And Maya Torres had spent 2 years building something small, because the thing she had been before was a person who lost 8 colleagues in a valley she couldn't name in conversation, and she was not entirely sure she wanted to be that person again. Picked up her tray, she cleaned up her space without anyone asking. She walked back to her quarters in the dark, past the training ground lights that stayed on all night, past the motor pool where the diesel smell hung in the air, like it was part of the architecture, past the range house where she could hear, faintly, someone running a function check on something in the distance. Click, rack, the sound so specific that her body registered it before her brain did, a small involuntary orientation toward the sound. Stopped, stood in the dark for a moment, listened to the wind across the installation, the distant security patrol, the mechanical hum of everything that kept a military station running around the clock. Then she went inside. Day 1 began at 05:15, when Maya's alarm went off and she got up without hitting snooze. She dressed in the dark. Physical assessment kit, shorts, compression top, running shoes. She ate a protein bar standing over the small sink in her quarters. Checked the chain around her neck, tucked it under her shirt, and went outside. The air was cold and damp, the sky still dark enough at 05:20 that the training ground floodlights were still running. She could see the other evaluation participants assembling at the course entrance from 50 meters out, the Marine contingent already together in a cluster. 5 of them, Mercer visible by his height and the way he stood with his arms crossed and his chin up. 3 other joint evaluation personnel she hadn't met yet, a Navy lieutenant she recognized from the base housing office, and 2 Army personnel on liaison assignment, whose names she had gotten from the briefing roster specialist Garza and Sergeant Ives. Vance was at the start point with a clipboard and a radio. He had a stopwatch around his neck and the expression of a man who had done this enough times that it had long since stopped being interesting to him. "Listen up," he said when the group has assembled. Day 1, physical. We run the course individually, timed. Then statics assessment, max pull-ups, max push-ups, 2-minute sit-up count. Then load-bearing ruck, 35 pounds, 4 miles, no time limit, but I'm recording your split. Everyone goes through in roster order. He looked up from the clipboard. Torres. Here, you're third in order. Specialist Garza and Ives ahead of you, then Mercer's unit in sequence. She nodded. Mercer caught her eye across the assembly. He held it for a second, then looked away. Garza went first. He ran the course at a solid pace, not exceptional, but competent. Good upper body on the wall obstacles. Slowed through the water hazard, which Vance noted on his clipboard without comment. Ives went second. Faster than Garza through the early section. Lost time on the log carry. Still good numbers. Both Army personnel looked comfortable in the environment, which told Maya they'd done similar evaluations at their home installation. Torres. She stepped up to the line. On my mark, Vance said. 3, 2, mark she ran. The course was a 1.4 of combined obstacles rope climb. Monkey bars, 12-foot wall, balance beam, crawl lane, 400-meter run section twice, log carry over a quarter mile, water obstacle that soaked everything, final sprint to the finish line. She had walked it the evening before, which she had been able to do because Vance had left the gate the Zumbrit unlocked for equipment check, and she had taken the opportunity to study the layout. She didn't run it fast in the sense that Mercer would have expected. She ran it efficiently, pacing the flat sections to preserve something for the obstacles, hitting each obstacle with the technique required rather than the force preferred, taking the log carry at a speed that looked slower than it was because her footwork was precise and she wasn't losing energy to lateral drift. Through the water obstacle, she moved economically, letting the water slow her, less than it slowed people who fought against it. Came off the course and hit the mat at the finish. Vance clicked his stopwatch. He looked at the number. He looked at her. He wrote it down without saying anything. She went to the side, caught her breath, drank water. The Navy lieutenant, whose name was Hendricks, came over and stood near her. "Good run," Hendricks said. "Thanks. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to embarrass myself on this course." "Keep your center of gravity low on the wall," Maya said. "Most people fight it with their upper body. It's a leg push." Hendricks looked at the wall. "Good call." He paused. "You've done something like this before." It wasn't quite a question. Maya drank more water. Obstacle courses. Hendricks took the hint and let it go. Mercer ran fourth in the Marine sequence. He was fast, genuinely fast, the kind of speed built from years of physical culture and genuine athletic ability, and he hit the wall obstacles with aggression that worked for some of them and cost him time on others. Came off the course, breathing hard, slapped Brash on the arm, and looked over at the scoreboard, where Vance was entering numbers. He looked at Maya's time. He looked again. The expression that crossed his face was brief and unguarded, the kind you catch in the moment before someone puts the mask back on. Confusion, then reassessment, then something that hadn't settled into a category yet. He looked at her. She was wrapping both hands around her water bottle the way she'd wrapped her hands this morning, systematically, with attention. She didn't look back at him. Brash leaned over and looked at the board. He straightened up slowly. "Huh," Brash said. "Shut up," Mercer said. Static assessment followed. Pull-ups first. The bar was standard height, overhand grip, full extension to chin above bar. Garza hit 12, Ives hit 15, Hendricks hit 9, and looked satisfied with it. Mercer hit 23, which was a genuine number, and dropped off the bar with the controlled satisfaction of someone who'd trained specifically for this moment. Brash hit 20. The third Marine, a lance corporal named Reyes, who hadn't spoken in the briefing, hit 18. Kowalski hit 16, which was solid. Maya stepped to the bar. She jumped up, set her grip, and started. She wasn't performing. That was the thing about it. She was just doing what the assessment asked. She kept her core tight, her kip controlled, her pace measured. She wasn't trying to beat Mercer. She was trying not to lose the back half to muscle failure, which meant pacing the first half. She hit 23 and kept going. At 27, Brash had stopped talking. 30, Vance had come 2 steps closer to the bar. She dropped off at 31. Her arms were shaking slightly, which she didn't attempt to hide. She walked to the side and shook them out. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Okay," Kowalski said quietly, to nobody in particular. Mercer's jaw was set. He was watching her shake out her arms with the expression of someone running a new calculation and not liking the result. He looked at Vance. Vance was writing on his clipboard with the studied neutrality of a man who had learned not to editorialize during assessments. Mercer looked back at Maya. She met his eyes this time. Not challenging, not satisfied. Just present the look of someone who was here, who knew exactly where she was and who she was looking at, and who had decided that the time for looking away was over. Mercer held the eye contact for 3 full seconds. Then he looked away first. The ruck march started at 1000 under a sky that had cleared to thin gray overcast, the temperature dropping as they moved into the tree-lined section of the 4-mile route. 35 pounds was manageable weight. For anyone in the group, the evaluation wasn't trying to break anyone on day 1. It was building a baseline. Vance had made that clear. The purpose of the ruck was not suffering. It was data. Maya fell into a pace that she could sustain without adjustment. She had learned ruck pace in training environments, where the route was rarely 4 miles, and the weight was rarely 35 pounds, but The mechanics were the same hip engagement, forward lean, just past vertical. Landing midfoot, letting the pack ride rather than carrying it with your shoulders. She had covered ground with twice this weight in conditions she was not going to think about right now. She was about a mile in, moving through the tree line section, when she heard footsteps drawing alongside her on the trail. Kowalski. He came up to her left side at a matched pace and ran there for about 30 seconds without speaking. "Can I help you, Corporal?" she said. "Just walking," he said. Another 30 seconds. "You're not a gunner's mate," he said. She kept her eyes on the trail. "That's my rate. That's your rate," he agreed. "But that's not all you are." She said nothing. "The pull-ups," he said. "Course, time. The way you walked the course last night before the assessment." She looked at him briefly. He kept a neutral face. "I had guard duty near the south gate. I saw you on the course at 1900. Reconnoitering the terrain," she said. "Standard practice." "For who?" She looked back at the trail. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. The trees moved in the wind, and somewhere ahead she could hear Garza and Ives talking as they moved, their voices carrying back through the cold air. "Mercer's not a bad person," Kowalski said. "I didn't say he was. He grew up a certain way. Marines in his family going back 3 generations. He has this picture in his head of what the military looks like and who belongs in it." A pause. "He's not mean. He's just wrong." Maya said nothing. "What happened in the mess hall?" Kowalski said. "He knows it was wrong. He won't say it, but he knows." "That's between him and his conscience," Maya said. "He's going to push you hard these next 3 days. The evaluation gives him cover to do it legitimately." She looked at him again. "Why are you telling me this?" Kowalski thought about it. "Because you walked out of that mess hall and didn't scream and didn't throw a punch and didn't make it a scene. And I've been in the Corps long enough to know that restraint like that usually means one of 2 things." He paused. "Either you didn't have anything to fight back with." He left the second option unspoken. Maya adjusted the straps on her ruck. "Appreciate the heads up, Corporal," she said. She increased her pace fractionally, not enough to signal anything dramatic, just enough to create a distance. Kowalski let it happen. He fell back to his own pace without pushing it. Maya moved through the trees, alone, the weight of the pack settling into familiar territory against her back. She thought about the 2 days remaining. She thought about what Sloan had said about correction. Trail curved left toward the open section, and she took the curve at a lean, boots steady on the rocky surface, the pack riding solids, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt the specific clarity that came. When the body was engaged and the mind had permission to be present, that state she had first discovered years ago in the water, in the cold, in the dark, reaching toward an objective that was too far away and closing the distance anyway. She broke from the trees into the gray morning light, kept moving. Behind her, somewhere back in the tree line, she heard Mercer's boots on the trail, closing. He was pushing his pace. She didn't change hers. And that was when she understood that the evaluation had already started producing data, not on fitness, not on tactics, but on something that didn't have a row on Vance's clipboard. On the question of who, under pressure, became something more, and who, under pressure, could only become louder. The answer to that question was going to have consequences that neither of them had fully prepared for. And the first consequence arrived that evening, when Commander Sloan called Vance into her office, closed the door, and set a piece of paper on the desk, between them a paper with a clearance code at the top that made Vance straighten in his chair without being told to. Before day 2 starts, Sloan said there are some things about Petty Officer Torres that the evaluation leadership needs to understand. Vance looked at the paper. He looked at Sloan. "How much of this?" he said carefully. "Is she aware that we know?" Sloan folded her hands on the desk. "None of it," she said. "And that's going to be a problem." Vance looked at the paper for a long time. It wasn't a long document, one page, single-spaced, the kind of summary that existed specifically because the full record couldn't travel freely. Security classification at the top in bold. A series of operational references that meant nothing without the context to decode them, and a short paragraph at the bottom that Vance read twice before he looked up at Sloane. "She's been here 4 months," he said. "Yes. And nobody flagged this when she was assigned?" "The assignment came through channels that don't cross my desk automatically." Sloane's voice was even. "Found it because of the incident report. I made a call. Call produced that document." She tapped the edge of the paper once. "What you're reading is what they were willing to send without a formal request, which tells you something about how carefully they're managing her file." Vance set the paper down. He rubbed the side of his face with one hand, the gesture of a man recalibrating. "The evaluation," he said. "We have her going through standard joint assessment against Mercer's unit. I'm aware. If what's in that document is accurate, it's accurate. Then we're not running a fair assessment. We're running a demonstration." Sloane looked at him steadily. "The evaluation criteria don't change. The standards apply to everyone equally. What Petty Officer Torres does within those standards is entirely up to her." She paused. "What I need you to understand, before day 2, is that if she chooses to perform at her actual capability, the administration of this evaluation needs to be prepared to handle what that looks like." Vance picked up the paper again. He looked at the operational references a third time. "How old is she?" he said. 28. He set the paper down for the final time. He stood, straightened his cover, and moved toward the door. Then he stopped with his hand on the frame. "Does Mercer know?" he said. "Nobody on this installation knows except the 2 of us." Sloane held his gaze. "And that's how she wants it." Vance was quiet for a moment. "And what she wants," he said slowly, "is about to stop being the deciding factor." He walked out. Sloane sat alone in her office. The paper was still on her desk. She turned it face down after a moment, then changed her mind and locked it in the drawer instead. Outside, the lights of the training ground were still burning against the dark. Day 2 started with fog. It came off the water to the south and moved inland across the station. In the hour before dawn, the kind of thick, close fog that reduced visibility to maybe 40 meters and made the training grounds feel like a different installation, smaller, quieter, with edges that disappeared before you reached them. Maya was awake before her alarm. She lay in the dark for the 60 seconds between consciousness and alarm, running the day in her head the way she'd been trained to, not rehearsing an outcome, just mapping the variables. Land navigation, tactical problem solving, unknown terrain element. The fog changed the land nav parameters. Compass and pacing would matter more than landmarks, and anyone who'd been counting on visual reference points was going to have a bad morning. She got up, dressed, ate, went outside. The fog swallowed the training ground lights and turned them into soft orange smears in the gray. She could hear the bass waking up around her vehicle engines, a distant PA broadcast, the rhythm of another day on a military installation that never fully stopped. Vance was at the nav course start point when she arrived, which was 6 minutes before the assembly time cacked. He was alone, standing with his clipboard and a thermos of something, looking out into the fog like he was reading it. He heard her coming and turned. "Torres, Master Sergeant." He looked at her for a moment longer than the situation required. There was something different in it from yesterday, not warmer, exactly, but more deliberate, like he was choosing where to put his attention. "Fog changes the course," he said. "I figured. You've done land nav before. Basic training requirement, Master Sergeant." He looked at her the way people looked at you when they knew you were being technically accurate and broadly incomplete. He didn't push it. "Start order's the same as yesterday," he said. "Garza, Ives, then you." She nodded and moved to the assembly area. The rest of the group arrived in 1s and 2s, Garza and Ives together, talking about the fog and whether it would burn off. Hendricks looking like he'd slept badly. Reyes and Kowalski side by side. Brash. Then Mercer, who arrived at exactly the assembly time, not a second early, which was its own kind of statement. He scanned the group when he arrived and found Maya without appearing to look for her, the way people found the thing they were tracking while pretending to look at something else. She was standing at the edge of the assembly, compass already in hand, map case under her arm. His eyes stayed on the compass and map case for a beat too long. She didn't look up. Land navigation at Harbor Ridge used a 6-point course over approximately 4 square kilometers of mixed terrain open field, tree line, creek crossing, a section of broken ground left over from an old construction project that had never been finished and now existed primarily to complicate nav exercises, and a final leg that brought you back towards the station from the northeast. Each participant carried a punch card, 6 control points marked by orange and white panels, each with a specific punch pattern. You had to find all 6 in sequence and return to the finish within the time window. Fastest complete card won. Incomplete cards were scored by how many points you made and how much time remained. Garza went first and disappeared into the fog. Ives followed 3 minutes later. Maya stepped to the start line at her designated time, took her map and compass, confirmed her starting azimuth, and walked into the gray. The fog was total within 20 meters of the tree line. She moved to her first control point using a pace count she'd calibrated on the way to the start she knew. Her stride at standard walking pace was exactly 62 centimeters, which she'd determined years ago and updated periodically because it mattered. Her first azimuth put her on a bearing of 310 degrees, distance approximately 350 meters to the creek crossing. She moved. She didn't rush the first leg. Rushing in fog without visual reference points was how you drifted off azimuth without realizing it, then overcorrected, then arrived at a point that was technically close but not the control point, and then spent 12 minutes triangulating back. She knew people who had done that. She had done it once herself, years ago, in an environment considerably more consequential than this, and the memory of it was sufficient to keep her honest about pace. Creek crossing was where she'd expected it. She punched her card, checked her next azimuth, and moved. Control point 2 was in the broken ground section. She navigated by terrain association. As much as compass, the creek ran northeast to southwest, which told her she was correctly positioned for the turn. The broken ground section had a specific contour on the map, a series of shallow depressions that she'd noted yesterday on a brief map study, and she hit the edge of them about 8 meters off her dead reckoning estimate, which was within acceptable error for the visibility conditions. She found control point 2, punched her card, moved. She was working through control point 4 when she heard someone behind her in the fog. Footsteps, not trying to be quiet, just moving fast through the undergrowth. Moving in roughly the same direction she was heading. She paused behind a tree and listened, placing the sound by distance and speed. Closing. She stepped out onto the trail line and kept moving. Mercer came out of the fog on her left flank, about 40 meters back, and fell into a parallel track. She knew he'd started 6 minutes after her, which meant he was running a pace fast enough to close a 6-minute gap in the first 2 control points, or he'd skipped one, which would kill his score. She filed that information and kept moving. He pulled even with her within 200 meters. Neither of them spoke. They moved through the fog together without acknowledgement, the way 2 people in a narrow corridor walk without touching. She could hear his breathing, elevated but controlled. He was running a high-tempo pace, and it was costing him. Planned to blow past her early and use the psychological advantage. She could read that in the pace. He hadn't planned on her already being at this position. He hit his next control point, 40 meters from hers. She heard the punch and kept going. The fifth control point was in the open field section, where the fog was thinner and you could see maybe 60 meters in any direction. She found it on her first approach, punched her card, and turned for control point 6. Mercer came through the field behind her, saw her at the panel, and changed course slightly. He was trying to get to a parallel track so he could see her line without following directly. She let him. She went to control point 6 on a route that was slightly longer than the most direct line, but ran through a section of terrain that she'd noticed on the map as having a consistent, readable contour. She got there clean, punched, turned for the finish. She came out of the tree line into the start-finish area at 43 minutes and some seconds. Vance was at the finish with his clipboard. He clicked his stopwatch when he saw her emerge, then looked at the number and wrote it down. She walked through and stopped to catch her breath, hands on knees letting her heart rate come down. Garza was already back, sitting on a concrete barrier drinking water. He looked at her emerge and calculated something. "That was fast," he said. "Fog slows most people down," she said. "Yeah." He paused. "Not you, though." She straightened up and got her own water. Mercer came through the tree line 4 minutes and changed behind her. He was moving fast enough that she knew he'd pushed the final leg. He looked at the finish area, saw her standing there, and his pace dropped from a run to a walk in a way that had the controlled quality of a deliberate choice. He looked at the clipboard. He looked at Vance. Vance didn't say anything. He just wrote the number down. Mercer walked to the side. Brash came over to him and said something low. Mercer shook his head. Whatever was getting said between them, it wasn't making him look better about it. Kowalski came out of the tree line a minute behind Mercer, saw the sequence of people at the finish, and his eyes moved between Mercer and Maya with the careful attention of someone who had been watching this develop and was revising his projections. The afternoon session was the tactical problem-solving component, which Vance ran in 2 stages: a written planning exercise and a practical field application. The written exercise presented a scenario: a 4-person element needs to cross 800 meters of open ground to a marked objective while avoiding 2 observation posts and reaching the objective with at least 2 members intact in a 40-minute window. Multiple route options were drawn on the scenario map. Participants had to produce a written plan with a primary route, an alternate, a timeline, and a communication plan. They had 20 minutes. Maya read the scenario once, looked at the map for 90 seconds, and started writing. She didn't use all 20 minutes. She used 14 and spent the remaining 6 reading her own plan for gaps, which was a habit she'd developed during mission planning cycles that happened in real time under real pressure, where the gap you didn't catch in your own plan was the gap that became a casualty. The practical field application took the 2 highest scoring written plans as graded by Vance in real time, which was genuinely impressive given his speed, and had those 2 planners lead a 4-person element through their actual route in the field. Vance announced the top 2 scores. Mercer's plan was first. His route selection was aggressive and time-efficient, prioritizing speed over concealment, a calculation that worked if the observation post parameters were accurate and the timeline held. Maya's plan was second. She hadn't expected first. Mercer had experience planning fire team movements that she didn't, and his knowledge of Marine tactical doctrine gave him vocabulary she'd had to substitute. What she'd done was tighter on the communication plan and more conservative on the alternate route, which Vance had noted on his scoring sheet with a single checkmark. They each selected 2 partners from the pool. Mercer took Brash and Kowalski. Maya took Garza and Ives. They staged at the start point 20 meters apart. "I'll go first," Mercer said to Vance. It was framed as a statement, not a request. "You'll go second," Vance said, without looking up from his clipboard. "Torres goes first. You observe, then you execute your plan. Those are the evaluation parameters." Mercer's jaw set. "Roger that." Maya took Garza and Ives and talked them through the plan in 2 minutes primary route, along the left drainage, crossing the open ground in 3 bounding movements, using the scrub vegetation as cover, timing the bounds to the 3-minute interval between observation post sweeps that she'd built into her plan based on standard LP/OP protocols. The communication plan was simple, radio silence, except for pre-designated hand signals and a single brake squelch system on the radio Vance had issued her. Questions, she said. Garza shook his head. I've said, what if the OP interval's different than your estimate? Then we slow down and recount, she said. Speed isn't the objective. Getting 2 people to the finish line is. Ives nodded. They went. The practical application was not the clean execution of a plan. It was never that. Garza clipped a branch on the second bound that made more noise than it should have, and they froze for 15 seconds before confirming the OP hadn't reacted. The third bound took longer than planned because Ives's ankle turned slightly on the uneven ground, and he needed 10 seconds to confirm it was a turn and not a break. He confirmed it was a turn. And they kept going, which was the right call, but the delay ate into their buffer. They reached the objective with 2 minutes and 30 seconds to spare. Mercer watched from the observation position. He watched the whole thing, which was the point of going second. You watched the first plan execute, and then you executed yours. It was designed as a learning structure, not a competition. Mercer looked at Maya's element reach the objective marker. He looked at the time on his watch. Solid, Ives said, beside her at the finish. He was limping slightly. That ankle thing was my fault. Kept going, she said. That's the decision. Did we pass? Vance appeared from his evaluation position, writing on his clipboard. He looked at both of them and then looked at his watch. 2:30 buffer, he said. Against a 40-minute window, that's a 12% margin. He made a note. That's a passing plan and a passing execution. He looked at Ives. Get that ankle looked at before tomorrow. It's fine, Master Sergeant. That was an instruction, Specialist. Ives limped toward the medical station, without further argument. Maya walked back to the start point to watch Mercer's element execute. She hadn't planned to. She'd planned to get water and find somewhere to sit for 15 minutes before the debrief. But she found herself walking to the observation point anyway, and she stood there and watched. Mercer ran his plan fast and direct. His route had less natural cover, but a shorter time exposure, and his timing relied on the observation posts being stationary rather than on an interval. For the first 2/3 of the route, it was working. Brash was quick, and Kowalski moved with the kind of quiet competence that came from someone who'd done this before and wasn't performing it. Then one of the evaluation observers, playing the OP role, moved position, which Vance had apparently authorized as a variable introduction, and Mercer's primary route suddenly had direct sight lines from a new angle. Mercer read it, stopped his element, and called an audible. That part was good. The recognition was fast, and the decision to stop was right. What came after was the problem. His alternate route hadn't been developed to the same level as his primary, and when he pushed his element through the alternate, the timing broke down. They reached the objective with 11 seconds to spare. Technically, a passing score. But the buffer was gone. Brash slapped Mercer on the shoulder when they hit the objective. Mercer didn't slap back. He stood there looking at the finish marker with the expression of someone doing internal math. He looked across the field to where Maya was standing at the observation point. She hadn't moved. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't nodding with the self-satisfied look of someone scoring a point. She was just watching the way you watch something you want to understand. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away and walked toward the debrief position. The evening debrief was held in a field-side briefing structure, a large tent with folding tables and a whiteboard that Vance used to walk through the day's scores and observations. He covered the land nav results first, then the tactical application, then the scores for day 2 in aggregate with day 1. Put the cumulative numbers on the whiteboard. Maya was first overall. by a margin that was not comfortable for anyone in the room. The tent was quiet for a beat after Vance finished writing. Brash leaned toward Mercer and said something under his breath. Mercer didn't respond. He was looking at the whiteboard with the particular stillness of someone choosing very carefully how they were going to react in a public setting. Hendricks, next to Maya, exhaled quietly and said, "Okay," in the tone of someone who had watched something happen that they didn't entirely have a framework for yet. Vance ran the debrief efficiently, pulled the land nav performances apart, praised Garza for solid compass work, identified Ives's pacing error that had cost him time on the back half, noted that several participants had lost azimuth in the fog, and discussed why. He did not editorialize about the top scores. He simply covered the executions against the standard. When the debrief reached the tactical application section, he pulled out 2 scoring sheets. Both plans were passable, he said. Both elements completed the objective. The differentiators were the alternate route development, the communication plan, and the buffer margin. He looked at the room. Plan that completes the mission with 11 seconds to spare is a plan that was one unexpected variable away from failure. That's not a criticism. That's the lesson. He set the sheets down. Day 3 tomorrow. Medical response and the combined scenario. Get rest. Eat something with substance. Ives, see the doc about that ankle tonight, not tomorrow morning. Dismissed them. The group filed out into the evening. The fog had lifted, finally, and the station lights were clear against the dark. Stars coming up in the east. Cold, clean air that smelled like salt water from the direction of the coast. Maya was putting on her jacket outside the tent when Mercer came out behind her. She didn't turn around. Torres. She turned. He was standing a few feet away, his jacket unzipped, hands not quite in his pockets. The body language of someone who had been thinking about what they were going to say and still wasn't entirely sure. The rest of the group had moved away, either toward the dining facility or toward the barracks. Kowalski was the last one visible, and he turned the corner and disappeared, leaving the 2 of them alone in the cold under the station lights. "You're good at this," Mercer said. She waited. "The nav." "The planning." He paused. "The course yesterday." He looked somewhere past her shoulder for a moment. "You didn't have to push the pull-ups that far. The assessment asked for max reps," she said. "I gave max reps." "You were making a point. I was completing an assessment." He looked at her directly. His voice dropped a fraction. "What are you actually doing here? At this station?" "I was assigned here." "That's not what I mean." She buttoned her jacket, taking her time with each button. "Corporal, I'm here because I was assigned here. Same as you. I'm going through this evaluation because Commander Sloan assigned me to it. Tomorrow's the last day. After that, we go back to our respective assignments, and that's the end of it." And the mess hall. It came out flat, not quite an apology and not quite a deflection. She looked at him. "That goes in the report." "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, it does." He stood there for another second. "For what it's worth." "Good night, Corporal," she said. She walked toward the barracks. He stood there in the cold and watched her go, and she could feel it, but she didn't turn around. Couldn't sleep. 0130. Lying in the dark with her eyes open, the familiar architecture of 3 a.m. sleeplessness that she'd lived with long enough to stop fighting. She lay still and let her mind do what it was going to do. Went, as it always did eventually, to the valley. Not the whole mission, just the moments that had become load-bearing, the ones she carried in the way that structural comforts carry a building. Invisibly, constantly, whether the building was doing anything or not. She thought about Okafor, who had been the best land navigator she'd ever worked with, who could read terrain in the dark from memory, and whose nav card had been punched at 5 of 6 control points when the mission changed and there were no more control points after that. She thought about what it meant that she was here, going through a joint evaluation at a shore-based station, running a land nav course in the fog, when Okafor would have completed it in 35 minutes and made the fog seem like a minor inconvenience. She didn't let herself stay there long. That was a boundary she'd learned to enforce. You could visit, but you couldn't stay. The staying was what took people down. She turned onto her side. She thought about day 3. Medical response was the component she was most confident in and least comfortable about. Confident because she had genuine trauma care training, real world, high consequence, the kind that got drilled in until the procedures existed below conscious decision making. Uncomfortable because the scenarios in a joint evaluation used simulated casualties and instructed bystanders, and the gap between that and what medical response actually looked like was significant enough that she always had to actively manage the translation. Combined arms scenario was the final piece. She had no information about its structure. Vance hadn't released it, which meant it was either deliberately withheld or improvised based on the evaluation's progress, and either way, she'd be going in cold. She was okay with cold. She turned onto her back again. Outside, she could hear the distant sound of a vehicle moving along the perimeter road, headlights crossing the ceiling of her room in a slow sweep as it turned. The base at night, doing what bases did at night. She found the sound settling in a way that had taken her months to learn early in her posting at Harbor Ridge. Every perimeter vehicle, every PA broadcast, every unexpected sound had triggered a sequence of response in her body that had nothing to do with Harbor Ridge and everything to do with elsewhere. She'd worked on that. It was better now. Not gone. Better. She was thinking about the combined scenario when her phone buzzed on the small table beside her bunk. A text message. Unknown number, which on a military installation meant a duty line. Picked it up. Read it. Commander Sloan needs you at Admin Building 4. Now. Come in uniform. She looked at the message for a moment. She got up. Admin Building 4 was a 2-minute walk from the barracks, a standard administrative structure with lights burning in 2 of its windows at nearly 0200, which was unusual. She went in through the main entrance and found the duty watch petty officer at the desk, who waved her through to the second corridor without asking for ID. Sloane's office was the third on the right. The door was open. Sloane was behind her desk, jacket on. Coffee going on the small machine in the corner, which meant she'd been here long enough to need it. Across from her desk in one of the visitor chairs sat a man Maya had never seen before. He was in his 50s, civilian clothes, khaki pants, a blue-collared shirt, a jacket that cost more than civilian clothes at this meeting should cost. Silver hair, close-cropped, the hands of someone who had done physical work for a long time before the work changed. He was watching the door when she came through it. Sloane stood. Petty Officer Torres. Thank you for coming. She gestured to the other chair. Down. Maya stayed standing. Who is this? She said. Sloane looked at the man. He looked at Maya with the expression of someone who had been looking at a file and was now looking at the person the file described. My name is Warren Lyle, the man said. I work with the Naval Special Warfare Oversight Group. I'm not going to give you a title because titles at this level tend to create more confusion than clarity. What do you want? Maya said. Lyle folded his hands in his lap. There's a situation developing. It's relevant to your background. I flew here tonight because the timeline is moving faster than we anticipated and because you're the closest relevant asset. Maya looked at Sloane. Sloane looked back at her steadily. She didn't look apologetic. She looked like someone who had already had the argument she would have had and had lost it before Maya got here. I'm a petty officer at a shore-based station, Maya said. I'm in the middle of a joint evaluation. The evaluation ends tomorrow, Lyle said. Then whatever you need, come back tomorrow. Tomorrow may be too late. He reached into his jacket and produced a single-page document, folded once. He set it on the edge of Sloane's desk, facing Maya. I'm not here to give you orders, petty officer, Your current posting doesn't put you in my chain. I'm here to make a request. She looked at the document. You can read it or you cannot read it, Lyle said. If you don't read it, I leave, and that's the end of it. If you read it, you'll understand why I came tonight. Maya stood in the office in the middle of the night, with the lights burning and the coffee machine making its quiet sounds, and this man sitting in the chair watching her with the patient attention, someone who had made a calculation about what she would decide before she'd made it herself. She looked at the document on the desk. She looked at Sloane. Sloane said nothing. She had the careful neutrality of someone who had made her own decision to stay out of this one. Maya stepped forward. She picked up the document. She read it. The room was very quiet while she read. When she finished, she folded it back along the original crease and held it in both hands. When, she said. 48 hours, Lyle said. Possibly less. Day 3 of the evaluation starts at 05:30. I know. She set the document back on the desk. She looked at the wall past Sloane's shoulder for a moment, the place on the wall that wasn't anything, that she looked at when she needed to think, without her face giving the thinking away. I finished the evaluation, she said. Whatever happens after that, I finish it. Lyle looked at her. He looked at Sloane. He picked up the document and put it back in his jacket. 05:30, he said. I'll be watching. Maya walked out of the office and back down the corridor and through the entrance and into the cold night air. She stood outside for a moment, the perimeter vehicle, made another slow circuit in the distance. The lights moved across the fences. She started walking back toward the barracks. She had 3 hours before her alarm. She thought about day 3. She thought about the document in Lyle's jacket. She thought about the 8 names she carried that nobody at Harbor Ridge knew she carried. She thought about what it meant that quiet had a shelf life. And somewhere behind her, in Admin Building 4, Warren Lyle sat across from Commander Sloane and said quietly the thing he hadn't said in front of Torres. Sloane listened. Her expression changed once, briefly, then settled back into something controlled. She reached for her coffee. She doesn't know the full scope, Lyle said. No, Sloane said. When she does, I know, Sloane said. She drank her coffee and looked at the closed door and said nothing else. She slept 90 minutes. Not because she couldn't sleep longer, but because her body had learned, over years of operational tempo, to take what was available and function on it without complaint. 90 minutes was enough to clear the fog of the night's thinking and come back to the surface with something functional. She'd operated on less. She'd operated on none. Alarm at 04:30. She was already awake when it went off. She dressed in the dark, ran through her kit by field uniform, boots, the small med pouch she carried on her left hip that wasn't standard issue and that nobody at Harbor Ridge had asked about. Picked up the chain from her locker, held it for a moment the way she always held it, a second, maybe 2, and then put it around her neck and tucked it under her collar. She thought about the document. She thought about Lyle sitting in that chair with his folded hands and his careful voice. Then she put it away and went outside to run. 05:15. Sky was clear now, stars fading at the edges as the dark thinned toward morning. Cold enough that her breath came out visible in short bursts as she walked to the assembly point. She could see others moving in from different directions, the small shapes of people crossing the lit portions of the station grounds, converging on the day 3 start point near the medical training complex. Vance was there. He had a second man with him that Maya hadn't seen before, a Navy corpsman, senior-looking, with the insignia of a hospital corpsman, first class, and that suggested he'd been briefed on the scenario and was professionally skeptical of how it would go. Mercer's unit arrived together. Mercer looked like he'd slept fine, which Maya read as either genuine or performed, and she gave it 60-40 in favor of performed. There was a tightness around his eyes that wasn't tiredness. It was the specific tension of someone who had spent part of the night running numbers. She understood the numbers he was running. She'd seen the whiteboard, too. Garza and Ives came in together, Ives moving without a limp, which was either a good sign about his ankle or a bad sign about his judgment. Hendricks arrived last, which was not late, and looked marginally better than yesterday. Vance let them settle. Day 3, he said. 2 components. First, medical response. You'll work in assigned pairs through a series of casualty scenarios. The corpsman here, Petty Officer First Class Darby, will grade your assessment and treatment decisions in real time. Correct decisions advance the scenario. Wrong decisions compound it. He looked around the group. This is not a first aid merit badge exercise. The scenarios are designed to have time pressure, incomplete information, and variables that change after you start. Make decisions and own them. A wrong decision you commit to is scoreable. No decision is not. He paused. Second component follows directly after, the combined scenario. Full details at the start. Pair assignments for medical response are on this sheet. He held up a clipboard. Reyes and Garza, Ives and Hendricks, Brash and Kowalski, Torres and Mercer. The quiet that followed lasted about 2 seconds. Brash looked at Mercer. Merce was looking at the clipboard with the expression of someone reading a document he disagrees with, but hasn't decided yet whether to contest. Maya was looking at Vance. Vance looked back at her without inflection. She looked at Mercer. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything. Any questions about pairing? Vance said, with the tone of a man who had made a decision and was asking the question as a formality. Nobody spoke. Good. Rotate to your first scenario station in 5. The medical response stations were set up inside the medical training complex, 4 rooms, each dressed as a different environment, a vehicle interior, an outdoor field site with a dirt floor and rough lighting, a narrow corridor, and an open bay with multiple simulated casualties. Mannequins with bleeding simulation systems, actors playing additional casualties or bystanders, pre-positioned equipment ranging from full trauma kits to single tourniquet setups, depending on what the scenario allowed. Darby circulated between stations with a grading sheet, a radio, and the unhurried patience of someone who had seen every possible mistake a person could make under pressure and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. The first scenario was the vehicle interior. A simulated casualty in the back seat of a utility vehicle parked inside the complex, presenting with an arterial bleed on the left leg, unconscious, airway compromised. The scenario gave them 4 minutes to stabilize and prepare for transport. Maya pulled the door and assessed in 3 seconds, airway first, bleed second. She said it out loud because grading required verbalization of decisions. Airways compromised. I'm repositioning the head. Mercer was on the other side of the vehicle, looking at the leg. Bleed first, he said. That's arterial. She bleeds out before the airway matters. Airway's compromised right now. She's not breathing effectively. She's breathing. Listen. Maya listened. The casualty simulator had an audio component, shallow, irregular breath sounds. Present, but barely, she recalculated. 2 seconds. Tourniquet the leg, she said. I'll manage airway and monitor. I'm not taking orders from tourniquet the leg, Mercer. There was a half-second gap that felt longer than it was. He pulled a tourniquet from the kit. He applied it to the upper thigh with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd been trained to do it and had done it enough times that the motion was clean. Time of tourniquet noted. He said it aloud because he knew Darby was grading. Maya had the airway repositioned and a jaw thrust applied in that same window. She checked the breath sounds again. Better, but not good. Called for a nasopharyngeal airway from the kit. Left side of the bag, Mercer said, without her asking. She found it, applied it. Airway established. They moved through the rest of the scenario vitals, secondary survey, packaging for transport in a rhythm that developed not from cooperation exactly, but from a shared understanding of what the situation required. They didn't agree on everything. She wanted a second Syvie access point, and he thought it was outside their scope and time window. Darby noted both positions without ruling immediately, which meant it would be scored based on the outcome of the scenario. They disagreed about the transport position and settled it in 4 words. Trendelenburg, Maya said. Flat. Spinal precaution. No mechanism for spinal. Trendelenburg. He looked at her for 1 second. Trendelenburg, he said. Darby made a note. At 4 minutes, Darby called the scenario. He walked them through the scoring without editorializing correct decision. Correct decision. Suboptimal timing on the tourniquet application by 12 seconds. Correct airway management. Position decision pending outcome review. He noted the verbal disagreements and the resolutions. They moved to the second scenario station. The outdoor field site was the hard one. Darby had clearly designed it to be the hard one. Multiple casualties, 3 simulated, 1 actor. The actor was a bystander who kept moving through the scene, picking things up, asking questions in an escalating voice that started as concerned and moved toward panic within 90 seconds. The lighting was intentionally inadequate. A single work positioned to illuminate the wrong part of the scene and create a shadow zone where one of the casualties was located. The equipment kit had been partially pre-depleted, 2 of the 4 tourniquets already used, bandages at half stock, the bag valve mask missing its mask component, which meant a seal couldn't be achieved. They had 5 minutes. The first casualty was visible. Chest wound, open, sucking the air-moving sound that training simulated with a small bellows mechanism. Maya went to it first because it was the most immediately life-threatening presentation visible from the entry point. Mercer did a rapid scan of the scene instead of going to the nearest casualty. 3 bodies, he said. I count 3. Chest wound here. Open pneumo. Occlusive dressing. She was already working. She found the dressing in the kit, the seal, not the standard bandage, and applied it 3-sided to the chest wound, leaving the 4th side open to vent. She verbalized the decision. Second casualty, Mercer said. He'd found the one in the shadow zone, moving the light with 1 hand. GSW to the abdomen, not actively exsanguinating, but it will be. Cover it and move. Abdominal wound without exsanguination pressure dressing will come back. He needs pressure dressing and move, Mercer. Count the casualties. He did it. He hated doing it. She could read that in the short, precise movements, but he did it. The actor bystander had gotten close now, was touching one of the casualties, asking if they were going to be okay, getting louder. Mercer turned and addressed him in a voice calibrated to land between firm and non-threatening. Sir, step back 6 feet and stay there. I need you to stay there. The actor hesitated. His direction, she assumed, was to not comply immediately. Step back, Mercer said again, quieter this time, which was somehow more authoritative. Now, the actor stepped back. 3rd casualty, Maya called. She'd found the 3rd, a simulated femoral bleed, the worst-case presentation in a depleted kit because the 2 whole tourniquets were now used on the chest wound packaging and the abdominal casualty. She looked at the kit. She looked at the casualty. She looked at Mercer. Both tourniquets are used, she said. He looked at the kit. He looked at the casualty. Improvise, he said. She pulled a triangular bandage from the kit and a pen from her pocket, something she carried habitually, which Darby would note and which would factor into the scoring. She built a makeshift windlass tourniquet in 40 seconds, which was not a fast seconds, and which she verbalized through entirely because improvised tourniquets required clinical justification in a graded environment. It held, she called it. Darby's radio squawked at the 5-minute mark. Scenario end. They were both breathing hard. The actor bystander dropped character and stepped off to the side. The room returned to a neutral space. Darby walked through the site, making notes. He was quiet for a long time. Improvised tourniquet, he said finally. What's the clinical reasoning for that specific construction? Windlass principle, Maya said. Triangular bandage has sufficient width to minimize tissue damage. Pen as the windlass rod maintains tension without a rigid device. Time of application verbalized. It's a field adaptation for a depleted kit. Darby looked at her. He looked at his notes. Where did you learn that specific adaptation? He said. She met his eyes. Training, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. He wrote something on his sheet. Mercer was watching her. She could feel it. She didn't look at him. They scored highest on the medical response component of the evaluation. Not combined individually, but their pair score was the top aggregate. Darby announced it with the same professional neutrality Vance used for everything, which was either institutional culture or a deliberate choice on his part. And the effect was that the information landed in the room without ceremony and sat there, unavoidable. Brash looked at his boots. Kowalski looked at the wall. Mercer looked at Maya. She was writing something in her small notebook, a habit from training cycles, after action observations, things you noted while the scenario was fresh, and that informed how you'd approach the next one. She was not performing indifference. She genuinely had something she wanted to note, and she was noting it. He watched her for a moment and then looked away. Combined scenario briefing happened at 10:00 in a clearing on the north end of the training grounds, where Vance had set up a whiteboard on a portable easel. The full evaluation group was there, plus Darby, plus 2 additional evaluation staff who had appeared for the first time that morning, and Warren Lyle, who stood at the edge of the group in civilian clothes with his hands in his jacket pockets and said nothing. Maya saw him and kept her face neutral. Vance uncapped his marker. The combined scenario is a hostage rescue and medical extraction, he said. This is a joint force problem. You are a mixed element responding to the following situation. He wrote on the board as he talked. Training facility in a remote sector has experienced a security breach. 2 friendly personnel are down, 1 ambulatory, 1 incapacitated with trauma. The objective is to extract both personnel through a defended corridor to a pickup zone 400 meters from the breach point. You will face opposing force personnel, OPA4 played by evaluation staff, here and here. He marked 2 positions on a rough map sketch. ROE is simunitions capable. You have marking rounds. They have marking rounds. If you're marked, you're out. There is no medical respawn in this scenario. If your element loses its medical personnel, the incapacitated casualty cannot be successfully extracted. He paused. Element leader for the rescue team is designated by cumulative score. Top scorer leads. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at the group. Petty Officer Torres leads the extraction element. The silence was total. Mercer's jaw moved. He didn't speak. Brash opened his mouth and then closed it. Kowalski stared at the whiteboard. Vance kept going, as if the silence were scheduled. Mercer, you're second in command. You take the breach point on my command. He distributed colored armbands, green for the extraction element, orange for OP4. 15 minutes to plan. Extract commences on my radio call. Questions, Master Sergeant. Mercer's voice, controlled. Corporal. She's Navy. This is a joint evaluation, but the tactical lead on an extraction is assigned by cumulative score, Vance said, which is how this evaluation has always been structured. Read your packet from day 1 briefing, page 3, last paragraph. He capped his marker. 15 minutes. Mercer looked at Maya. She was already looking at the rough map sketch on the whiteboard. She had her compass out and was oriented. Element, she said, without looking away from the board. Circle up. The evaluation group moved. Mercer's Marines moved with them, not fast, not with enthusiasm, but they moved because the evaluation structure required it, and because Vance was watching, and because, however much Mercer didn't like what was happening, structure he'd lived in his entire career said you followed the designated chain of command in a training environment, full stop. Garza and Ives moved to her without hesitation. Hendricks followed. Kowalski took a position on her right, Reyes across from him. Mercer took a position, last and slightly separate, but he took it. Brash was OPF4. He went to the opposing staff table without comment, which was either discipline or relief. Here's what we know, Maya said. She used a stick to sketch in the dirt beside the board a FASTA medium, something she could update. 2 friendly casualties at the breach point. 1 ambulatory, 1 trauma patient. 400 meters to the pickup zone through here, she marked the corridor, with OPT positioned at these 2 points. Our objective is both casualties at the PZ within the scenario time window. She looked around the circle. Questions before I continue. What's the time window? Ives asked. Vance didn't specify. That means it's either event-driven or it's a burn-down timer. We don't know. We plan for speed. She looked at Mercer. Your assessment of the OP4 positioning. You know these people. Where are they actually going to set up versus where Vance marked them? A pause. Vance marked the obvious positions, Mercer said. Brash is going to push forward from the first position. He doesn't hold ground, he moves into contact. The second position is probably going to anchor, but they might float 1 person to the south side of the corridor. So we plan for the anchor position being static and the first position being mobile. Yeah, okay. She looked at the sketch. We split the element. Lead team Mercer, Kowalski, Reyes, you go through the north approach and create contact with the forward OPF4. Hold their attention. Don't try to neutralize them. Hold them. She looked at Mercer. Can you do that without trying to win the firefight? Mercer looked at her steadily. I can follow the plan. That's what I asked. Then yes. Second team Garza Ives. Hendricks, I'm with you. We approach south. Under the OPF4 float, if there is one. We reach the breach point, locate both casualties, package the trauma patient for carry, bring both to the PZ. She sketched the movement lines. Casualty carry is the slowest element. We need at least 3 minutes of holding action from the lead team to get the trauma patient to the PZ at an extraction pace. 3 minutes is a long time to hold a position with simunitions, Kowalski said. It is, she agreed. That's why you're not holding a position. You're moving, you stay mobile, you stay noisy, you make them think there are more of you than there are. She looked at Mercer again. Your judgment on movement. I'm not going to script your tactical decisions in the engagement zone. Mercer blinked. It was small, but she caught it, the recalibration of someone who had expected a different kind of leadership from her. Understood, he said. Any casualties in the lead team before we reach the PZ, fall back to my element and assist with carry. Don't hold a position alone. She looked around the group. Communications, we have 2 radios. Mercer takes 1, I take 1. Single channel, brake squelch for all clear, voice for contact reports. Keep transmission short. She looked at the sketch one more time. Questions. Ives had one. What if the trauma casualty is too heavy for 3 people to carry at extraction pace? Then we improvise a drag system and we move slower, which means the lead team holds longer. She looked at Ives. Your ankle. It's fine. I need a straight answer. Pause. It's sore. It's functional. You're on the casualty carry. If it gives out, Garza and Hendricks take it. And you provide cover. She looked at him directly. That's not a demotion. That's a contingency. Say you understand it. I understand it, Ives said. Okay. She stood. 11 minutes left. Walk your approach routes. Don't go past the green line. Brief questions to me. Let's go. The element dispersed. Mercer stood for a moment, looking at the dirt sketch. He looked at her. She was already moving toward the south approach, to walk it before the scenario started. He watched her go. She's good, Kowalski said quietly beside him. Mercer said nothing. Mercer, I heard you. He picked up his radio and followed his route. Vance's radio call came at 10:37. All elements, scenario is live. Clock is running. Maya's team moved south. The corridor was a mix of terrain, open ground on the flanks, a central section with prefabricated obstacles that the training staff used for various exercises, and that now served as the choke point where the OP F-or second position was likely anchored. She could hear, from the north, the sound of Mercer's element moving into contact with the first OP-F-or position simunition fire, the distinct flat crack that didn't sound like real fire, but registered in the same part of the brain anyway, followed by shouted contact calls that Mercer was using deliberately to create acoustic signature. He was making them loud. He understood what she'd asked for. She moved her element through the south flank at a pace between a fast walk and a jog, fast enough to cover ground, slow enough to keep the trauma carry manageable when they reached it. Garza on point, Hendricks on the left, Ives maintaining pace, Maya reading the terrain and the sounds simultaneously. The float, if there was one, would be somewhere in the next 100 meters. She held up a fist. Element stopped. She listened. Movement. South side of the obstacle section. Single person, moving laterally, which was a float position. She looked at Garza. She held up one finger and pointed south. He nodded. She pointed at Hendricks, then at the central route. She made a walking motion, keep going. Slow. She pointed at herself and Garza, then south. Flanking movement, he understood. They moved. The float OP-4 didn't see them coming because he was watching the central route, where Hendricks was creating just enough movement to hold attention. Maya came around the south side of the obstacle at close range and tagged the evaluational staff player with her hand on his shoulder before he could raise his marker. "You're out," she said quietly. The staffer stepped off to the side, out of the scenario, and keyed his radio once to signal it to Vance. They moved to the breach point. The two casualties were in the breach area, a staff member lying prone in a trauma simulation rig, limbs staged to indicate the nature of the injury. A second staffer, standing nearby, playing the ambulatory casualty with a staged arm wound and specific instructions about what they could and couldn't do. Maya went to the trauma casualty first. The staging indicated a chest wound, left side, and a leg injury that prevented independent movement. She verbalized the assessment, not for Darby, who wasn't present in the scenario, but for her element, so they knew what they were moving. Chest wound, left side stable. Leg injury, cannot ambulate. We're carrying. She looked at Garza. You and me on the carry. Hendricks, take the ambulatory casualty. Keep him moving. She looked at the ambulatory staffer. You can move under your own power. Walk with my teammate. Stay close to him. The staffer nodded. She looked at Ives, who had held the south flank. Clear? Clear, Ives said. They lifted the trauma casualty. Garza took the head and shoulders. Maya took the legs, not the optimal arrangement for sustained carry, but the one that kept the chest wound elevated. It was heavy. The simulation rig added weight to approximate a real casualty, and the 400 meters to the PZ was 400 meters of terrain, not flat ground. She had known it would be heavy. She'd accounted for it. From the north, Mercer's contact sounds were still going. He was 3 minutes in, and still engaging. She could tell from the pattern of simunition fire that he was moving constantly, using the obstacles, making the OP-F-or work for every inch. He was doing exactly what she'd asked, and he was doing it well. She moved. The carry was the part where plans met reality in the most uncompromising way. Garza was strong, but he wasn't experienced with this specific technique, and after 90 meters he adjusted his grip, and the casualty shifted, and they had to pause for 6 seconds to reestablish position, which cost them, but didn't break them. Hendricks had the ambulatory casualty moving at a good pace. Ives covered the south flank and kept his eyes working, even though she could see, in his movement, that his ankle was genuinely hurting now. The slight compensation in his footfall, the way he was loading his right side. He didn't say anything. He kept going. She didn't say anything either. Kept going. 200 meters from the PZ, the anchor OP-F-or broke position. She heard the movement to the north and east, which meant Mercer's element had done enough that the OP-F-or had shifted priority, which also Mercer's team had lost the initiative and might be taking him. Couldn't help that from here. She could only move. 150, 100, 75. Garza's breathing was audible. Her own arms were past the comfortable zone, into the zone where the muscles were still working, but complaining about it. And she was aware of the complaint and was choosing not to act on it, the way you chose not to act on irrelevant information. 50 meters. Mercer's radio voice, on her earpiece, flat and fast. We're down one. Kowalski's out. Two of us still moving. She keyed the radio once. Received. Keep moving. 25 meters. They crossed the PZ boundary marker at 10:51. 14 minutes from scenario start. She and Garza set the trauma casualty down on the designated PZ ground marker. Hendricks brought the ambulatory casualty in 10 seconds behind them, crossed the line, and immediately put his hands on his knees. She looked at the group. She looked at the PZ. She keyed her radio. Element lead to Vance, both casualties at PZ. Extraction team across the line. Vance's voice came back, measured, copy, scenario clock. A pause. 14 minutes, 18 seconds. She let out a breath. Garza laughed once, a short, startled sound like he hadn't planned to. Put his hands on his head. Ives sat down on the ground. Mercer came across the PZ boundary a minute later with Reyes, both of them marking round residue on their gear, which meant they'd taken fire but hadn't been tagged with a disqualifying hit. Mercer looked around the PZ, both casualties, both element members, and he did the math in his head that she'd already done. He looked at her. She was crouching in the trauma casualty simulator, checking the staging on the chest wound, checking the staging on the chest wound because she wanted to understand what they'd actually moved through, what the clinical picture would have been in a real scenario. Not performing reflection, just doing it. He walked over and crouched beside her. 14 minutes, he said. Yeah, our plan was 18. I know. He looked at the casualty staging. She could feel him next to her, close enough that she could hear his breathing come down from the exertion. Float, he said. How did you know there was a float? Vance said you could read his positioning. I gave him credit for being willing to complicate it. Mercer was quiet for a moment. I would have gone through the center. Faster route. Faster route runs through the anchor position and the float. You'd have taken both casualties and had a slower carry. He nodded slowly. Not agreement, exactly. Recognition. You've done this before, he said. Not a question this time. Not the way Kowalski had asked it, more direct, with more of the certainty that came from watching someone operate for 3 days and arriving at a conclusion you couldn't argue yourself out of. Stood up. The evaluation's done, she said. Good work today. She walked toward the staging area to clear her kit. He stayed crouched by the casualty marker for a moment. He looked at the PZ boundary. He looked at the PZ boundary. He looked at the route she'd taken, the south flank, the approach that had worked. He was running it back in his head. She could tell from the stillness and the direction of his gaze. Vance appeared at the edge of the PZ with his clipboard. Full element debrief in 20, he said. Admin building 3. Get water. He looked at his clipboard. He wrote something. He didn't look up when he said what he said next. Good evaluation, petty officer. Maya stopped walking. She turned to look at him. He was still writing on his clipboard, face down. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, a deliberate quality to his stillness that told her the comment had not been made. Casually, started walking again. Behind her, across the PZ, she heard Reyes say to Kowalski, low enough to be private, but not quite private enough. What is she? Kowalski's answer came after a pause. I don't know, he said. But she's not a gunner's mate. The debrief ran 40 minutes. Vance was thorough in the way that Marine Master Sergeants with careers were thorough, precise, without wasted language, covering what worked and what didn't, without varnishing either. He acknowledged the extraction time. He identified the points where the lead team's movement discipline had saved the scenario from a worse outcome. He noted Ives's ankle compensation as a medical decision point and said it would be in the report, which made Ives look at the table. At the end of the debrief, Vance set his clipboard on the table. Cumulative evaluation complete, he said. Individual scores and recommendations go to the respective command elements within 72 hours. I'm not going to read scores aloud. He looked around the table. What I will say is that this evaluation group performed above the baseline standard on day 3, which is not always the case, and the combined scenario was the best execution I've seen from a mixed branch element at this station in 4 years. He paused. That's a result of the element leadership and the individual performance of each of you. Don't give the credit to one place. He stood, dismissed. Chairs scraped back. Maya was 2 steps from the door when Mercer said her name. Stopped, turned. The room was half emptied. Garza and Ives were already through the door. Hendricks was behind them. Reyes and Brash had gone. Kowalski was near the door, and he looked between Mercer and Maya, and then walked out, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him, without latching it. Mercer was standing at the table. He didn't have his hands crossed. He didn't have the jaw set, the posture, the armor of his default presentation. He looked like someone who had been running at full speed for 3 days, and had stopped. I need to say something, he said. She waited. The mess hall. He held eye contact. What I did. The thing with the tray. Putting my hands on you. He stopped. Started again. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it. I did it anyway because he paused again. I don't have a good reason that I'm not ashamed of. The room was quiet. She could hear the ventilation, the distant sound of the bass going about its afternoon. Someone in the corridor outside. She looked at him. He was not comfortable saying it. She could read that in every part of him, the effort of it, the way his hands had moved slightly, and then stopped. This was not a polished apology. It was the kind that cost something. The report is filed, she said. It goes through the process. I know. Whatever comes from that, comes from that. I know. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to pull it. I'm not asking for anything. I just stopped. I watched you lead that extraction. I watched the whole evaluation. Something shifted in his face. I thought I knew what I was looking at when you walked into that mess hall. I was wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. You were. She pushed through the door. Warren Lyle was waiting outside the building. He was leaning against the wall, with his hands in his jacket pockets, exactly the way he'd been in Sloane's office at 0200 the night before, with the same economy of movement that came from someone who had learned to wait without advertising that they were waiting. Straightened when she came out. Good run, he said. She walked past him. Torres. She stopped. She didn't turn around. The timeline moved, he said. The 48 hours I gave you last night, it's 22 hours now. She stood still. Sloane has the operational brief. It's waiting for you in her office. He paused. The evaluation is officially concluded. Whatever happens next is your decision. She turned. You said it was a request, she said. It is. And if I say no? He looked at her steadily. Then I go to the next name on the list. He paused. There are names below yours. They're qualified. They're not you. The wind crossed the station grounds between them. Somewhere behind the admin building, a vehicle engine started. What's on the list of names? She said. People with your background. Survivors, she said. He didn't flinch at the word. Yes. She looked past him, at the training grounds. At the obstacle course in the mid-distance, the range house, the cleared PZ that was already being reset for the next evaluation cycle by a work crew that had appeared at the edges of the area. She looked at the chain around her neck. She couldn't see it was under her collar, but her hand went to the outside of her collar for a half second and then dropped. I'll read the brief, she said. Lyle nodded. That's all I'm saying, she added. I'll read it. I understand. She walked toward Sloane's building. Lyle watched her go. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number that went through on the first ring. She'll read the brief, he said. A pause on the other end. That's not a yes, the voice said. No, Lyle agreed. But it's not a no either. He looked at the empty space where Maya had been. And for what it's worth, after watching 3 days of that, if she says yes, you should be glad she did. He ended the call. Across the station, Maya Torres walked through a door and disappeared from view, carrying everything she was and everything she'd tried not to be, moving toward whatever came next at a pace that had always been. Underneath everything, exactly that, of someone who already knew the answer. Sloane's office felt smaller at 1400 than it had at 0200. Maybe it was the daylight coming through the single window, making the walls more visible, making the space more defined. Maybe it was the additional people in it. Whatever the reason, Maya stood in the doorway for a moment before she walked in, taking inventory the way she always took inventory of a new space exits. Sightlines, who was sitting where and what their body language communicated before anyone opened their mouth. Sloane behind her desk, Lyle in the same chair he'd occupied the night before, or one identical to it, and a third person Maya hadn't seen before, a woman in navy dress uniform, captain's insignia, sitting in a chair that had been brought in from somewhere else because there weren't enough in the room. She was mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where posture was a form of communication. Captain looked at Maya the way people looked at things they'd been briefed on, but were seeing for the first time, calibrating the briefing against the reality. "Close the door," Sloane said. Maya closed it. She didn't sit. There wasn't a chair for her anyway. "Petty Officer Torres," Sloane said. "This is Captain Diane Marsh, Naval Special Warfare Group 2. She flew in this morning." "Ma'am," Maya said. Marsh looked at her steadily. "Sit down, Torres." "There's no chair, ma'am." Lyle stood and offered his. Maya looked at it. She sat. Lyle leaned against the wall. Marsh leaned forward with her forearms on her knees, which closed the distance across the small room and was probably deliberate. "I'm going to skip the part where we talk around what you already know, and the part where I pretend this is a routine check-in," she said. "You read the brief last night." "I read it," Maya said. And I have questions." Marsh looked at Sloane briefly, looked back. "Go ahead." Maya had spent the 3 hours between reading the brief and walking into this office identifying the specific questions she needed answered before any decision could be made. She'd done it the way she'd been trained to do operational planning, not starting from what she wanted the answers to be, but from what information was actually required to make a sound decision. She'd written 3 questions on a small piece of paper in her pocket. She didn't take the paper out. She had them. "The personnel referenced in the brief," she said. "The 2 held at the Callaway facility. I need to understand how they got there." Marsh didn't hesitate. "Surveillance operation that went past its authorized window. The extraction plan failed at Phase 2. They've been held for 11 days. "What kind of held?" A pause. "Detained. Not publicly acknowledged." "Are they mobile?" "One is. One is not." Maya looked at her. "What's the medical picture on the one who isn't?" Marsh glanced at Lyle. Lyle looked at the wall. "We don't have current medical intelligence," Marsh said. "Estimate. Based on last confirmed contact, possible fracture, lower limb." "Possible. We don't know." Maya was quiet for a moment. "And the extraction window. 22 hours from last night," which as Marsh looked at her watch, approximately 13 hours. "And the team. 4 people, including you if you say yes. The other 3 are currently staged at a secondary facility, 60 miles from here." "Who are they?" Marsh told her. 2 names Maya didn't know. One name she did a name attached to a face she hadn't seen in 14 months. A name that belonged to someone who had been on a different team during the deployment that had ended with 8 people coming home out of 12. Someone who had survived a different version of the same day. Kept her face even. "Petty Officer First Class Rena Vasquez," she said. "Yes. She was assigned to Group 1. She transferred 11 months ago." Maya sat with that for a second. Vasquez. She hadn't known Vasquez different team, different mission track, crossing paths in staging areas and briefings, and the specific fraternity of people doing the same narrow kind of work. But she knew her reputation, and she knew her capability, and she knew from the specific way that knowledge traveled in a small community that Vasquez was someone you wanted on a problem. "What's my role in the extraction?" Maya said. "Medical and breach support." "Your record on trauma management is the reason your name is on this list." Marsh paused. "Your other qualifications are the reason you're first on it." Maya looked at the window. The afternoon light had shifted while they'd been talking, moving from direct to angled, the kind of change you only noticed if you were paying attention to something else and caught it in peripheral vision. She looked back at Marsh. "The Callaway facility," she said. "I need the layout. I need the current intelligence on personnel numbers and rotation schedules. I need to know what the extraction route looks like and where the primary and alternate are." Marsh reached into the bag beside her chair and produced a sealed folder. She set it on the desk between them. "That's what we have," she said. Maya took the folder. She read it in a room. They gave her a small office off the main corridor, cleared of its usual occupant for the afternoon. An hour and 15 minutes. She read the intelligence package twice, the layout diagrams 3 times. Personal estimates with the awareness that intelligence estimates in her experience ran between 60 and 80% accurate, and that the 20 to 40% was the part that put people in medical rigs in training scenarios. She made notes on this paper they'd given her, not on her own notebook operational, notes on borrowed paper that would go back into the folder when she was done. She thought about the 2 people held at Callaway. She thought about Okafor. She thought about the 8 names, and about how the specific weight of those names had shaped the last 2 years of her life, the posting to Harbor Ridge, the careful construction of an unremarkable profile, the deliberate management of distance between what she had been and what she was presenting herself as being. She thought about the mess hall, about the tray hitting the floor and the eggs scattering, and the sound of Mercer's voice carrying across a room full of people who watched her clean it up. About the choice she'd made in that moment to be someone who cleaned it up and walked away, because being someone who cleaned it up and walked away was consistent with the person she'd decided to become. Small, manageable, invisible. About whether that had ever actually been a sustainable decision or whether it had just been a version of waiting. She folded the notes inside the folder. She went back to Sloane's office. All 3 of them were still there. Nobody had gone for coffee, or stepped out, or done any of the things people did when they were waiting, and didn't want to show that they were waiting. They were just they're in the same positions, with the specific stillness of people who had agreed before she left the room that they would not use the time to talk about her. She set the folder on the desk. "I have conditions," she said. Marsh looked at her, not surprised, not offended. "Tell me." "The intelligence package on the Callaway facility is 11 days old on the personnel estimates and 7 days old on the layout. I need whatever's been collected in the last 72 hours, even if it's fragmentary. I'm not going in on a package that's a week stale. I can get you a supplemental package by 1900, Marsh said. Second, the medical kit for the extraction needs to include a traction splint and a portable oxygen unit. The incapacitated personnel has a lower limb fracture. I'm not moving them without immobilization. Done. Third, she paused. Vasquez briefs me on the other 2 team members personally before we stage. I need to know who I'm working with from someone I can ask direct questions. Marsh looked at Lyle. Something passed between them that Maya read as the resolution of a conversation they'd had before she walked back in. Vasquez can call you at 1700, Marsh said. I want a video call. I need to see her. Another pause. Video call at 1700. Maya looked at Sloane. Sloane had been quiet through the entire exchange, sitting behind her desk with her hands folded and her face in the careful neutral that Maya had come to read as Sloane's version of active listening, not passive, not absent, but choosing to receive rather than transmit. Commander, Maya said. Petty officer. The incident report. Mercer, Sloan, looked at her. I want to make sure it's processed correctly through the standard channels before I'm not here to follow up on it. Sloane's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did a small shift that might have been respect, or might have been something closer to sadness. It will be, Sloane said. Maya nodded. She looked at Marsh. Yes, she said. The call with Vasquez came in at 17:03 on a laptop Lyle's support staff had set up in the cleared office. The connection was encrypted, the video slightly degraded by it, which gave the image a compressed quality that made Vasquez look like she was being observed through plate glass. She looked the same. Thinner, maybe. The kind of thin that came from months of operational tempo rather than anything intentional. Her hair was shorter than Maya remembered. She had the eyes of someone who had slept fine recently and was compensating for recent insomnia with a discipline that didn't quite cover it. She looked at Maya's face on her screen for a moment. Torres, she said. Vasquez, a beat. You look like hell, Vasquez said. I've been at a shore station for 4 months. And that did it to you? Joint evaluation, 3 days. Vasquez almost smiled. It was the almost smile of someone whose face had gotten out of the habit. How'd you do? I led the extraction element. Of course you did. She looked at her for another second. You read the package? This afternoon. Tell me about the team. Vasquez told her. The 2 names Maya didn't know were Petty Officer 2nd Class Tomas Wren, a breacher with 18 months of post-Bud S operational experience, and a woman named Specialist Asha Delacroix, Army, attached to the team on secondment from a unit that Vasquez named with a look that communicated more than the name did. Young, both of them young, which meant capable in the ways that mattered and occasionally missing the judgment that only came from being wrong in consequential situations. Wren is solid, Vasquez said. He makes decisions fast. Sometimes too fast, but he's self-aware about it, and he course corrects. Delacroix is the best shot in the element. She's quiet, and she's accurate, and she doesn't waste movement. What are the gaps? Wren hasn't a casualty carry under contact. Neither has Delacroix. I have, Maya said. I know. What about you? I've done 3 in the last 11 months. Vasquez said it flat, without affect, which was its own kind of information. I know what it costs. She paused. Torres. The medical picture on the personnel at Callaway. If it's worse than the package says, then we adapt. And if we can't adapt fast enough. Maya looked at the screen. We adapt faster. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Good to see you, she said. I mean that. Yeah. Maya looked at her. 17 months. About that. I heard you transferred. I needed a different assignment. A pause. I needed to be doing something. Instead of, she stopped. Instead of being between things, Maya said. Yeah. Connection made a small stuttering artifact in the image, a half-second freeze that resolved itself. They both waited it out. Staging at 2200, Vasquez said. You'll be transported to the secondary facility by 2100. Captain Marsh has the movement order. I know. And Torres. Vasquez leaned slightly toward her camera. Whatever you've been doing for the last 2 years, the shore station, the low profile, She stopped again. I get it. I don't think it's the wrong thing. Another stop. Say it, Maya said. I'm glad you picked up, Vasquez said. When Marsh called, I'm glad you didn't say no. Maya looked at her on the screen. I haven't said yes to the next one after this, she said. I know. Vasquez almost smiled again. One at a time. The call ended at 17:31. She had 4 hours before transport. She went to the training facility because it was where she went when she needed to think without sitting still. The heavy bag again, the old one with the reworn canvas, the one that had enough accumulated density to be honest. She didn't wrap her hands this time, just hit it open-palmed, in a rhythm that was less about striking and more about pattern, the physical equivalent of running the same road twice to make sure you know where the turns are. She was 20 minutes in when she heard the door. Stopped. Turned. Mercer. He was in PT gear, which meant he'd come here with the same intention she had and hadn't expected to find the facility occupied. He looked at her and looked at the bag and looked at the door he'd come through, with the expression of someone recalculating whether to stay. Stayed. He went to the other bag at the far end of the floor, the newer one. More give, less honest, and started working without speaking. She went back to her own bag. For 10 minutes, the room had nothing in it but the sound of impact and breathing, and the ventilation and the distant noise of the bass. Then Mercer said, from across the floor, "Evaluation results go to my CO tomorrow." She didn't stop moving. "I know. He's going to ask about the Torres situation." That's what he'll call it. The Torres situation. A pause between combinations. The report from the mess hall. That's how it should go. Yeah. He was quiet for a bit. The rhythm of his hitting changed slightly harder, then more controlled, then harder again. He's going to ask me what happened, and I'm going to tell him. Okay, all of it. She stopped. She turned to look at him. He was still hitting the bag, not looking at her, but his jaw was set in the way that was different from the mess hall, not aggressive, not performing. Tight with something he was working through. Mercer. He stopped. Looked at her. "It's the right thing," she said. He looked at her for a moment. He wasn't going to say thank you. She could see that, and she didn't want him to. What he was going to do was nod, once, which he did. He went back to his bag. She went back to hers. After a while, he said, without looking up, "Where are you going?" Paused. "What do you mean?" "You're leaving the station." "I don't know how I know that, but I know it." He kept moving. The man in civilian clothes. "Sloane's office. The way you've been moving since the debrief, like someone who's already transitioned." She looked at the bag in front of her. "Temporary assignment," she said. "Voluntary?" She thought about it. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Stay safe," he said. It was an odd thing to say. Not wrong. Just specific in a way that suggested he had more of a picture than she'd given him credit for. She didn't ask how. "You too," she said. She was packing her kit in her quarters at 1930 when the knock came. She said, "Come in," expecting Lyle or Sloane. It was Kowalski. He stood in the doorway, looking slightly uncertain, which was different from his usual careful manner, and told her this wasn't an official visit. "Corporal," she said. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know something's going on," he said. "Because I've been in long enough to know what a voluntary TDY that materializes within 12 hours of a civilian liaison visit looks like." Kept packing. "You've been in that long?" 8 years. He looked at the kit on her bunk. The med pouch. The non-standard items that a gunner's mate wouldn't have. Torres. She stopped. "Whatever it is," he said. "Take care of yourself out there." She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway of someone else's quarters at 1930 to say something that had cost Tim something to decide to say. It was an uncomplicated, human thing to do, and it landed in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Appreciate that, Kowalski," she said. He nodded. He started to go. "Hey," she said. He stopped. "Keep an eye on Mercer." He looked at her. "Not because he needs managing," she said. "Because I think he's in the middle of something, and he's going to need someone in his corner who actually sees him straight." Kowalski looked at her for a moment. "You see a lot." Occupational habit. He almost smiled. "Yeah, I'll keep an eye on him." He paused. "Good luck." He was gone before she could say anything else. The transport vehicle came at 2050, a non-marked SUV driven by someone in civilian clothes who didn't give a name and didn't ask questions, which was the standard format for this kind of movement, and which Maya had experienced enough times to find unremarkable. Put her kit in the back and got in, and watched Harbor Ridge Naval Station recede through the rear window as the vehicle moved toward the gate. She watched until the perimeter fence disappeared in the dark. She faced forward. The secondary facility was a 90-minute drive into territory that became less populated as they moved inland highway to two-lane road to a gravel surface that the SUV's suspension communicated accurately through the seats. The driver maintained a consistent speed and said nothing for the entire drive, which Maya appreciated. She ran the Callaway layout in her head. Primary breach point, the northwest access. Alternate at the south service entrance, which was lower priority for the facility's security rotation, based on the intelligence package. Route to the held personnel, 2 corridors, 1 stairwell, the room on the level 2 northwest corner, that the package identified as the holding location, based on signal intelligence that was 7 days old. The route to exfil back through the primary breach point to the vehicle staging area, 400 meters from the facility perimeter, under cover of the facility's own infrastructure. She identified the 3 points where the plan was most likely to degrade. Stairwell, tight, predictable geometry, the kind of space that offered no alternatives if you met something unexpected in it. The signal intelligence on the holding location. 7 days was long enough for a location change. If the personnel had been moved, finding them added time that the extraction window might not absorb. The medical picture, unknown. The package said possible fracture, and Maya had added 2 words to that assessment in her own head, assume worse. She could work with those gaps. She'd worked with worse. What she needed was the team to be what Vasquez had described, and she needed the supplemental package that Marsh had promised to give her something more current than 7 days on the key intelligence points. Package had been delivered to the secondary facility ahead of her arrival. She'd read it on arrival. If there was anything in it that changed the calculus significantly, she'd adjust. If there wasn't, she'd execute the plan she had. The vehicle turned onto the gravel surface, and the facility appeared in the headlights, a low, functional building with the look of a maintenance operation or a small logistics hub, the kind of structure that existed in the gap between one definition and another. 2 vehicles already parked outside, lights in the windows. The driver stopped. Maya got out and took her kit from the back. She stood in the dark for a moment. The air was different out here, drier, without the salt that had been part of the Harbor Ridge atmosphere for 4 months. She noticed that the way she always noticed the shift from one environment to another, the specific geography of air that her body had learned to read. The door of the facility opened. Vasquez was standing in the light from the doorway. She looked at Maya across the distance between the vehicle and the entrance with the expression of someone who had been in a place like this before and was glad to have the persons they'd been waiting for come through the door. Maya picked up her kit. She walked toward the light. Inside, the facility was exactly what it looked like from outside: utilitarian, functional, stripped of everything that wasn't necessary. A central table with the tactical layout spread across it. Wren and Delacroix on one side, Vasquez moving to the other as Maya came in. Maps, radio equipment. The kit laid out in the specific organized manner of people who had worked together long enough to have a shared system for it. Wren was younger than she'd expected and taller than she'd expected, with the wiry build of someone who had always been fast and had trained into strength. He looked at Maya with the direct, assessing look of someone who had been briefed, but was forming his own opinion. Delacroix looked at her and nodded once. That was it. No speech in it. Maya nodded back. She set her kit on the table. She looked at the layout. The supplemental package, she said. What changed? Vasquez put a finger on the layout. Personnel count at the facility went from the package estimate of 6 to an observed 8 as of yesterday afternoon. 2 additional unknown role. How's the holding location? Unchanged. Same room. You're confident? 90%. What's the 10? The signal window's narrow. It's possible they moved in the last 24 hours, and we got clean signal anyway. She looked at Maya. 10%. Maya looked at the layout. She looked at the stairwell route. She looked at the northwest breach point and the alternate. If we go in and the room's empty, she said, we have 8 minutes before the absence of contact at the breach point becomes a problem. How do we use 8 minutes? Ren spoke for the first time. Split the element. 2 people hold the breach. 2 search the adjacent level. Adjacent levels, 3 additional rooms, Delacroix said. 8 minutes covers it, if we move fast. We move fast, Maya said. She looked at Vasquez. Agreed? Vasquez looked at the layout. Agreed. But the contingency only runs once. If the adjacent level's clear, we exfil with what we have. We don't extend the window. Agreed, Maya said. She looked at Ren. You've done stairwell clearance? Yes. With what on the other side? 2 and 3 person groups. This stairwell might have more. The supplemental puts 2 personnel unlocated. They're somewhere in that building. She looked at him directly. If you hit something unexpected on the stairs, what's your first decision? Ren looked at her. He understood what she was asking. Not tactics, but judgment. Not what he'd do, but whether he knew why he'd do it. Break contact and consolidate, he said. I don't push forward blind. She held his gaze for another second. Good, she said. She looked at the layout one more time. At the held personnel location. The route from there to the exfil point. At the specific distance that 2 people were going to have to cover with one of them compromised under conditions that the intelligence package approximated and reality would determine. Thought about the 8 names. She thought about Okafor at Control Point 5. She thought about a training ground in the morning fog and a pull-up bar and a man who had needed her to be someone he'd already decided she wasn't. She thought about the chain around her neck and what it meant that she still wore it, not as memory exactly, but as something more active than that. Claim. A commitment to the people the emblem represented, to the fact that they had existed, and that she had been there, and that she had come back when they hadn't, and that coming back carried an obligation she had tried to put down and found she could not put all the way down, no matter how carefully she arranged her life. She looked at Vasquez. Brief the timeline, she said. Vasquez picked up the marker. They worked through the night. They went in at 0214. The Callaway facility sat in the middle of nothing useful, a flat, scrub-covered stretch of land with access roads that converged from 2 directions, and a perimeter that relied on fence line and camera coverage rather than guard density. The intelligence package had been right about the camera rotation. It had been wrong about one thing. The northwest access point had a secondary lock that the package hadn't flagged. A heavy-gauge padlock added recently enough that it wasn't in any of the layout documents. Ren had it cut in 40 seconds. He carried the right tools, and he knew how to use them without making the kind of noise that traveled. They went through the breach point in stack Ren first, Delacroix second, Maya third, Vasquez holding the rear and the radio. Corridor inside was what the layout had shown. Narrow, fluorescent lighting on a dim night setting, the specific institutional smell of a building that had been closed environment for a long time. Cold. The facility's heating wasn't running at capacity, which told her either it was underused or there was a deliberate choice being. Well, there was a deliberate choice being made about comfort levels for the people inside it. She filed that and kept moving. Some spout. Ren took the first corner check without signaling, which she noted he'd briefed that he communicated corners, and he'd skipped it on the first one. She touched his shoulder from behind and held up 2 fingers when he turned. He understood he'd missed one. He nodded. He didn't miss another. The stairwell was at the end of the first corridor. Ren went to the door and listened with his ear to the frame, not the door itself, which would carry vibration from the other side, but the frame, which was a technique that required a second to explain to most people. He hadn't needed it explained. He listened for 4 seconds and then held up a flat hand, clear. They went up. Level 2 was quieter than the ground floor. One light was on at the far end of the corridor, a yellow rectangle under a door that was the first indication of active occupancy above the ground level. Maya counted the doors. The holding room was the 3rd on the northwest side. The lit door was the 5th on the east side, which put it across and down from the objective. Put her mouth close to Vasquez's ear. Active room at the east end. One light. Vasquez nodded. She and Delacroix peeled toward the east end at a pace that kept them below the threshold of floor noise. Security on the lit room let anyone inside stay inside until the primary objective was secured. Ren and Maya went to the third northwest door. No light underneath. She put her hand on the door handle and felt the specific cold of metal that hadn't been touched recently. She looked at Ren. He was at the frame on the opposite side, ready. Turned the handle and pushed. The room was dark. She stepped in with her light on low angle, not high, which would have hit the ceiling and scattered, but low, sweeping the floor first and then the walls. 2 people, one on a cot against the far wall, lying still in the specific stillness of someone either deeply asleep or not fully conscious. One sitting on the floor with their back against the near wall, who came up fast at the light and had both hands raised before she'd taken a second step. Easy, she said. Quiet, were the extraction. Person sitting on the floor, a man, mid-30s, the controlled panic of someone who had been here 11 days and was very carefully deciding whether to believe what they'd just heard, lowered his hands by degrees. Extraction, he said, like he was testing the word. Yes. Can you walk? Yes. Who's on the cot? Hendricks. A different Hendricks is not the Navy lieutenant from the evaluation, but the name landed in her head and she filed it and moved. She took a bad fall 4 days ago. Her leg, I've got it. Maya was already at the cot. She ran her light over the woman lying there mid-40s, a bruising pattern on her face from something earlier than 4 days ago, and the left leg positioned in the specific way of someone who had learned through pain that not moving it was better than moving it. Not unconscious, eyes open, tracking the light. Can you hear me? Maya said. Yes. The voice was rough from disuse. Femur, I think. Which part? Midshaft. I felt it go. 4 days on a midshaft femur fracture without immobilization or pain management. Maya kept her face and her voice level. I'm going to immobilize your leg before we move you. Going to hurt. I need you to stay as quiet as you can. I know, the woman said. Maya pulled the traction splint from her kit. She set it up in 90 seconds, which was not fast enough to be comfortable for the woman on the cot and not slow enough to cost them the window. The woman made one sound when the traction engaged, a short, compressed sound that she cut off herself, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the edge of the cot. Good, Maya said. That's the worst part. You're lying, the woman said. I'm lying, Maya agreed. But the second worst part is just carrying. The man from the floor had moved to the door and was watching the corridor. Ren was beside him, covering the east end. From that direction, nothing had moved. Maya looked at Ren. She held up the woman on the cot, 2-person carry, she and Ren. He nodded. She looked at the standing man and pointed to the corridor. Stay behind us. Stay quiet. Stay close. He understood. They moved. Carry was harder than the evaluation scenario because the traction splint added length and the corridor was narrow enough that navigating the corners required stopping and repositions, which cost time in increments that added up. The woman on the cot didn't make a sound through any of it. She had the look of someone who had decided that sound was a resource she could not afford to spend. At the stairwell door, Vasquez appeared from the east end with Delacroix behind her. Vasquez looked at the carry, looked at Maya, and moved to take Ren's position at the head without being asked. Ren dropped back and covered the stairwell descent. They went down. The ground floor was still clear. Camera rotation gave them a 4-minute window from breach to exfil route, and they were inside it, and they were barely, with the kind of barely that you didn't look at while you were moving, because looking at it didn't help. They came out through the northwest breach point into the cold air, and Maya felt the temperature change on her face and kept moving. The exfil's route ran along the facility's north fence line to the vehicle staging area, 400 meters of open ground in the dark, with the facility's exterior lighting running at the same dim setting as the interior, which gave them shadow, cover along the fence. 300 meters. 200. The radio on Vasquez's kit crackled a single brake squelch from the vehicle, meaning the driver had eyes on them, and the exfil point was clear. 100 meters. They crossed the staging area boundary, and the vehicle was there. Rear doors open, the driver outside it, and moving to help with the carry. Maya and Vasquez transferred the woman into the vehicle cargo space with the careful coordination of people who had done similar transfers before, both of them knowing, without discussion, how to manage the splinted leg through the door geometry. Standing man got in behind her. Ren Delacroix. Maya was the last one in. The doors closed. The vehicle moved. She leaned back against the interior wall of the cargo space and let her hands come off the adrenaline they'd been running on for the last 22 minutes. They were shaking slightly, not from fear, just from the biochemistry of high focus operations winding down. The normal aftermath of a body that had been running at capacity and was now being told it could stop. She'd been here before. She breathed through it. Across the cargo space, the woman with the femur fracture was looking at her. "You're good at this," the woman said. "Hush," Maya said. "Don't talk. Save it." The woman almost smiled. She hushed. The debrief happened at 0600 at a facility that was not the secondary site they'd moved again after exfil, kind of layered movement that was standard for this kind of operation, and that Maya had navigated enough times not to find disorienting. A medical team had met the vehicle at the transfer point and taken custody of the woman with the femur fracture, which had required a brief and unpleasant conversation about the traction splint placement that Maya won, because she was right, and the receiving corpsman eventually acknowledged it. Standing man, whose name she learned at debrief, was Petty Officer Second Class Jerome Cahill, sat across the table from Captain Marsh and gave a 20-minute account of 11 days that Maya listened to, with the specific quality of attention she gave to things that mattered. He was composed in the way that people who had survived something difficult were composed when the immediate crisis was over and the adrenaline had cleared, and what was left was the task of describing it accurately. He was not performing toughness. He was just reporting. When he was done, Marsh looked at Maya. "Medical assessment of the extraction," she said. "Traction splint held through the carry. She'll need surgical evaluation for the fracture midshaft femur with 4 days of no immobilization. Means potential vascular compromise at the injury site. The receiving team has my notes." She paused. "She's going to be okay." "How certain?" 80% on the vascular question. "Higher on everything else." Marsh nodded. She wrote something. Vasquez across the table was looking at Maya with an expression that was not quite as small, but was in the neighborhood. She looked away when Maya caught it. The debrief ran another 40 minutes, covering the 2 additional personnel the supplemental package hadn't been able to locate. They'd been in the lit room at the east end of Level 2, and Vasquez and Delacroix had confirmed 2 facility security personnel in that room during the operation, neither of whom had been aware of what was happening in the northwest corridor. That gapped the sound discipline. The timing, the execution of the stairwell, and carry, without contact, was what the debrief kept coming back to, and each time it did, Maya gave the same answer: the team. Formal debrief, Marsh asked her to stay. The room cleared. Vasquez was the last one out, and she looked at Maya on the way through the door with the look of someone who had things to say and had decided to let the room happen first. Marsh set her pen down. She looked at Maya across the table with the frank, level attention of someone who had been watching a long time and was ready to say what she'd been watching. "I've read your full file," Marsh said. "Not the summary Lyle carries. Complete record." Maya said nothing. "I know what happened 14 months ago. I know what the mission looked like, and I know what the outcome was, and I know why you requested a shore posting afterward." She paused. "I also know that the request was appropriate and that nobody questioned it, because what your team went through warranted exactly the kind of stand down you took." "Is there a point coming?" Maya said, not rudely, just directly. Marsh looked at her. The point is that I've watched you for 3 days of evaluation and 1 night of operational execution, and I want to make you an offer. What kind? Group 2 has a training billet opening in 6 weeks. Senior instructor, special operations candidate pipeline. The role is yours if you want it. She held Maya's gaze. It's not a field assignment. It's not what you did last night. It's the next generation teaching what you know to people who are going to go do what you've done. Maya looked at the table between them. You're not the first person to make me that offer, she said. I know. You turned it down twice in the last 18 months. Marsh paused. I'm asking why. The room was quiet. Somewhere in the facility, she could hear movement, the building waking up. People doing the normal morning things in spaces adjacent to where the less normal things happened. Footsteps, a door, the sound of water running somewhere. Because teaching means being at a place, Maya said. It means being fixed. And for a long time, being fixed felt like being findable. Marsh was quiet. Findable by what? She said. Maya looked at her. By the version of myself that went into that valley, she said, and came back different. I spent 2 years staying mobile because I thought if I kept moving, it couldn't catch up. She paused. The evaluation caught up. Last night it caught up. She looked at the wall. You can't run from what you actually are. You just put distance between yourself and the moment when you have to decide what to do with it. Marsh let the silence sit for a moment. And now? She said. Maya looked at the table. She thought about the woman on the cot, 4 days, a broken femur, no sound through the carry. She thought about Wren at the stairwell frame, listening. Delacroix's nod when they met. Vasquez in the doorway of the secondary facility, looking at her across the parking area in the dark. She thought about a mess hall and a tray on the floor and the choice she'd made to clean it up, and the different choice she'd made 3 days later at the end of an evaluation, and the different choice after that in a parking lot at 1900 to pick up the folder from Marsh's desk. Small choices, accumulating. I'll take the billet, she said. Marsh didn't react effusively. She nodded once the acknowledgement of someone who had expected this answer, but had learned not to assume it. 6 weeks, she said. I'll have the assignment orders cut by end of week. I need to go back to Harbor Ridge first. For how long? A few days. There's something I need to finish. She was back at Harbor Ridge by 1400. The station looked the same. The mess hall, the training grounds, the obstacle course, the administrative buildings. Perimeter vehicle making its circuit, the salt smell off the water, and the specific ambient noise of a military installation that ran on a schedule that didn't stop. She went to Sloane's office first. Sloane looked up when she came through the door, and her expression held for a moment before it settled into something that wasn't quite relief, but was close to it. You're back, Sloane said, for a few days. Maya sat down in the visitor chair. The incident report, moving through the standard process. Mercer's CO received the documentation 2 days ago. Sloane folded her hands. Mercer submitted a voluntary supplemental statement. Maya looked at her. What kind? The kind that corroborated the report in full and added detail. Sloane held her gaze. It was unsolicited. He wrote it and submitted it to his own command without being asked. Maya was quiet for a moment. What happens to him? Formal reprimand. Letter of counseling in his record. Mandatory conflict resolution and conduct review. He keeps his rank. Sloane paused. The supplemental statement was a factor in the decision not to pursue more significant disciplinary action. His CO wanted it noted that self-reporting carries weight. It should, Maya said. You disagree with the outcome? She thought about it. The honest version of the answer, not the one that was easiest to give. No, she said, it's proportionate, and the record is accurate now. She paused. What matters? Sloane looked at her for a moment. Captain Marsh contacted me this morning. The billet. Yes. Sloane's expression shifted into something that was harder to read not quite pride, because Sloane wasn't the kind of person who claimed pride in someone she'd known for 4 months. More like the recognition of something that had been headed in a direction and had arrived there. Accepted, Sloane said. Yes, good. Sloane said it simply. Just good. One word with weight in it. She found Mercer at the training ground in the late afternoon, running the obstacle course alone. Not for the evaluation that was over, but in the way that people ran things when they had something to work through. And the physical effort was the only medium that felt adequate. She watched him for a moment from the edge of the course. He came off the final obstacle and saw her. He slowed to a walk. He came over breathing hard, chest moving, the exertion visible. He didn't say anything. He was waiting. I heard about the supplemental statement, she said. He wiped his face with his forearm. How? Sloane. He nodded. He looked at the course. I should have done it the day you filed. It took me longer than it should have. Yes, she said. Did. He looked at her then. Direct, without the default armor. Is that, he paused, is that it for the report? Process runs its course. It's out of my hands now. She looked at him. What you did with the supplemental statement, that's not nothing, Mercer. I want you to know that I know that. He looked at the course again. He was working through something, and she could see it, the specific processing of a person who had been moving fast in one direction and had changed course and was still feeling the physics of the change. I grew up believing certain things about who belonged where, he said. Not because anyone sat me down and taught me that. Just the water you swim in. He paused. I'm not explaining it as an excuse. I know, she said. I'm not asking for an explanation. Then what are you asking for? She looked at him. Nothing, she said. I came to tell you that the report is handled and the process is running and that she stopped. That what you did in the evaluation mattered. The holding action on the combined scenario. 3 minutes of movement under contact so the carry team could make the PZ. That was real work, Mercer. Do you understand that? He looked at her. Yeah, he said. Quiet, not performing anything. Good. She started to go. Torres. She stopped. Where are you going? Actually. Not temporary assignment. She looked at him over her shoulder. Teaching, she said. He processed that. Teaching who? The next ones. He stood on the edge of the obstacle course in the late afternoon light, sweating and tired, and he looked at her with an expression that had none of the mess hall in it, none of the performance, none of the crowd playing, none of the architecture of a person, none who had decided in advance who they were looking at. Just a man looking at someone he'd spent 3 days figuring out he'd been wrong about. They'll be lucky, he said. She didn't answer, set. She walked back toward the main building. Her last evening at Harbor Ridge, she went to the training facility one more time. Not for the bag. She stood in the space for a moment, looking at the old bag with its reworn canvas, the newer one at the far end that had always been too soft. The fluorescent lights, the equipment along the wall, the specific smell of effort that accumulated in training spaces and didn't leave. She thought about Okafor. She let herself do it the full way, not the managed version. She thought about his hands and the specific way he'd laugh, which was not a big laugh, but was genuine in a way that was rare. And she thought about what it meant that someone like that could be there one day and gone the next, and the world continued, at exactly the same institutional pace, regardless. She thought about the 8. She thought about what she was going to say to the first class of candidates she stood in front of. She hadn't figured that out yet. She'd probably stand there for a moment and look at them and try to figure out which ones had already been broken in ways they hadn't recognized yet, and which ones thought they were ready and weren't, and which rare one or two had something underneath that they didn't know how to name. She'd know how to talk to all of them. She'd learned how from being all of them at different points. She turned off the training room light and walked out. The morning she left, Vasquez called. Mayas was loading her kit into the same kind of unremarkable vehicle that had brought her in from the secondary facility, standing in the Harbor Ridge parking area with the morning light coming in flat from the east and the salt smell doing what it always did. "I heard you took the billet," Vasquez said. "News travels. In our world." "Yeah." A pause. "How do you feel about it?" Maya looked at the station, at the perimeter fence, the mess hall building, visible between the admin structures. "Feel like it's right," she said. "That's enough," Vasquez said. "Is it?" Torres. Vasquez's voice had the quality it got when she was saying something she'd thought about before she said it. "You've been carrying those 8 names like they were a reason to stop. Like coming back was a debt you were paying by making yourself smaller." A pause. "They weren't a reason to stop. They were a reason to keep going. You just had to figure out which direction." Maya stood by the vehicle in the morning. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Yeah," she said finally. "I think that's right. Call me when you're settled at Group 2. "I will." She ended the call. She stood there another second, looking at Harbor Ridge. She got in the vehicle. The driver pulled out through the gate and onto the main road, and the station went through the rear window, the same way it had gone before, slowly, in increments, getting smaller without disappearing all at once. She watched it until the perimeter fence was gone. She faced forward. 6 weeks later, Maya Torres stood in front of a room of candidates who did not know her name. 22 of them. The full range of what that number always was. Some who carried themselves with the confidence of people who had been the best at everything they'd done so far. Some quieter, watching the room with the careful attention of people who had learned early that watching cost less than assuming. Few who looked like they were trying to figure out which of the 2 categories served them better in this specific environment and hadn't decided yet. She looked at them for a moment before she said anything. She thought about the first time she stood on the other side of a room like this. The person at the front, the things she hadn't been able to understand then about what it meant to be in a position where your knowledge of failure was more valuable than your knowledge of success. She thought about a mess hall and a tray and a choice. She thought about Okafor. She set her hands behind her back. "I'm not going to tell you what this program is going to do to you," she said. "You've heard that speech. You'll hear it again." She looked at them, not the performance of looking, but the actual kind. "What I'm going to tell you is what gets people through it." Paused. "Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the ones who've never lost anything." She looked at the room. "The ones who get through are the ones who understand that what they build here is not for themselves. It's for the person next to them. It's for the person they haven't met yet who is going to need something in a specific moment that only they can provide." She paused again. "What this is, that's all it's ever been." The room was quiet. She looked at them for one more moment. "Let's start," she said. Strength held quietly, given away freely, that is the only kind that lasts.